It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener-supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUV Sports.org. This is One on One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUV Sports.org. Running sports call-in show on this Saturday, December 5th. It is 11 o'clock here in New York. Emmanuel Barbari, alongside my man Chris Baccia, our producers Alex Walls, Andrew Posadas as our headlines throughout the show. Chris, happy holidays, my man. Hope you enjoyed the Thanksgiving. And we are in December. A lot of sports to unpack, but also a nice spirit that we've lacked for a lot of 2020.
Yeah, we're on the other side of Thanksgiving, Christmas around the corner. It's sort of crazy. It's been a wild year, a tough year, and we're now in the 12th month of it. And it sort of feels odd to be coming up on almost 1 year before our entire landscape changed, not just in sports, but in everything that we do. So we're still talking about it as it relates to sports. I think it's actually our first segment today, Emmanuel. But you know, it's good to continue to do these Zooms every Saturday and meet up and talk about some sports.
With you until 2 a.m. here on FUV. We're also streaming, as always, on YouTube and Facebook Live. You mentioned it, Chris. The spirit is improving in terms of being in the final month of 2020. You have the holidays right in the thick of things and surging towards the new year. And part of that spirit includes a team in town, the New York Football Giants, who entering week 13 have a realistic path to winning the NFC East. And in fact, are the only team in the division that control their own destiny entering this week. We'll get into all the doomy gloomy with the NFL and COVID, some outrageous comments from Roger Goodell this week, and get into the baseball offseason as well. A lot to get into, dive into, and lay out in terms of implications. But just taking face value, we have competitive football to watch tomorrow. Giants, Seahawks, a ton on the line. The Giants will not be whole, but they will have the opportunity. Have the opportunity, and that's all you can ask for, to have a statement win on the road and really cement themselves as a formidable NFC East champ.
Yeah, and it's something to be excited about. But look, it's going to be a very tall task in Seattle. To me, with or without Daniel Jones. You mentioned them not being whole. Daniel Jones one play because of the hamstring. It'll be Colt McCoy. And that's going to make things even tougher for a Giants team that was going to go into Seattle. And this has been the division that everybody is just trying to lose. And every single week, my calculus on who gets out changes, because I was even starting to look up on Dallas, and then they get crushed on Thanksgiving. So who really knows at this point? The division is wide open. A lot of people in our program think it is going to be the New York Giants. I have never been on that page. I can't go on that page. They're not a very good football team. Yes, it's true. They're 4-2 in the last 6. But this Seattle game, you know, whether or not they're able to win, because most teams in the league can't beat Seattle, but it'll be interesting to see how well they play them defensively, especially. Can they give Russell Wilson and DK Metcalf some kind of test? If that's the case, then things will be looking up for the Giants in the last couple games here.
Well, I think they're already looking up, and they're two different topics, Chris, in my mind. One is, do the Giants have a realistic path to win the NFC East, which is the wackiest type of situation I think I've seen in terms of a football division ever in my time watching the National Football League. So them winning the division versus them being a legitimate team that can compete with Seattle on the road, I think are two completely different topics. And I hear Giants fans equating them and basically saying, yeah, we're in this thing. We can beat anyone. We've been in every game this year. We haven't embarrassed ourselves in any game. We have what it takes to pull it out. That I'd say slow your roll, because you're looking at a team coming off barely surviving the Cincinnati Bengals in a game they had to win or else their season was over. So if they didn't win that Bengals game, we wouldn't be talking about the Giants in the same breath with any of the NFL's elite. They barely beat the Bengals with Colt McCoy as a backup. And now it's real time. Now it's put up or shut up. Now it's you're competing with the best of the best. So could they lose this game and come out of the NFC East? Sure. And it's very sad to say that. But I think it's two different breaths, and I think there's a disconnect right now as to what the Giants actually are. And in my mind, especially without Daniel Jones, that is not a team that can compete with Seattle.
No, and I don't think they are. I don't think they are at all. And here we are. The fact that they're in the conversation is, that ain't even fair. But they're in it. They're in it. And they've got a chance to host a playoff game in 2020, as ridiculous as it is. And I'm sure it won't go so well, but this is how it works. You win the division, and I'm completely on the same page as you. I don't think that they go into Seattle. I think Seattle could well embarrass them, but then again, the Seahawks have shown that even they have some vulnerabilities. But Colt McCoy, speaking of bad backup quarterbacks, is a bad backup quarterback, I think. So I don't give them much of a chance.
So we will get into everything to know about that Giants matchup, lay out where we stand in terms of that viable path for the Giants to win the NFC East. That's a major topic of discussion on this Saturday night as we turn the page into, Chris, either way you look at it, it's competitive. It is playoff type December football in New York. So I'm not going to complain about that. I'm not going to sound the alarm, because we've been complaining for too long about not having that in this area. And that leads me to the New York Jets. And we're in that time of year, not only in football, but across the spectrum of topics we're going to be talking about tonight, Chris, where there is some vibrance, but it's also dull enough where we're hanging on comments from Adam Gase that maybe should have been made about 15 months ago about Sam Darnold and the progress of the football team and where they went right and wrong in previous drafts. That's how sad it's become with the New York Jets and what we look for with headline-worthy material to discuss tonight. So we'll get into Adam Gase, we'll get into the Jets, we'll get into what the future holds. But I am genuinely concerned that that's the direction we're going in tonight. Adam Gase and his comments on a quarterback he has been unable to develop.
Yeah, well, I'll have a lot to say on this later. And right now, I'll just say Adam Gase he's a lame duck head coach. I mean, it is like a person in a job who everybody knows won't be there. It's got to be a bizarre situation for him and the entire locker room, the entire building, because he's a dead man walking. And the operation is run by somebody who has apparently no stake. He's admitted the fact that his tenure in New York is a failed tenure, which it is. So good self-awareness. Maybe I could give him that
Amazing.
point. But here's where we are. The New York Jets are the most pathetic franchise maybe in professional sports right now. Forget about just the National Football League. And I used to compare the Jets to a team like the Browns that was more lowly. You just look for who is at the bottom of the cellar. Well, that's the Jets right now, of course. I mean, just on record, haven't won a game. So we'll have a lot to say about the New York Jets.
We will. And I don't know. I'm still coming together with the phrases I'll use. And this is a play it by ear scenario, Chris, in a week in, week out basis. So I'm sure our opinions will be more formulated by the end of the night. And we're going to have some COVID-19 talk tonight as well. And if you're tired of hearing about it, turn off the radio. We don't care. There is plenty of COVID-19 talk because it's here. It's here to stay. And until we have a workable vaccine and until some of these leagues wake up to what's moving on, it is something we must discuss. And it'll start with the NFL. We'll do that first. And then we're going to go into another array of topics, whether it be the NHL or across the board, about reactions to this. And Chris, I'm just a little disheartened that there's still not only a topic, because we knew a pandemic would last X amount of months, but the disconnect between what probably should be happening and the grasp that should be had on it and what we're currently seeing, that's the alarm bell in my mind.
Well, and we'll talk about the NFL, and I think we have some criticisms there, but other leagues now gearing up for a winter season, whether that's the NHL or the NBA and later even baseball, we're about to go through what we've already been through, and it could be bad enough that it's going to throw everything into a frenzy again. So even if leagues are releasing schedules and showing optimism, unfortunately, this is the year, and it's going to be the year and a half at least, of just total uncertainty, and everything will be suspended. The NFL is sort of the interesting case where it's carved itself out as seemingly an exception to all of the challenges here, and they're just going full steam ahead. I think they, even though they think that they might be immune, are going to run into problems too, and we'll get into that.
We have a couple guests for you. Speaking of COVID-19, the reaction to it, how we're going to get through a college basketball season this year. Fordham women's basketball head coach Stephanie Gately, for you Fordham fans, going to join us in the 12 o'clock hour. That's next hour. Once we hit midnight, we will talk to Coach Gately about how the women's basketball team is responding right here on the Rose Hill campus at Fordham. We'll also talk to Mike Walszewski, the PA announcer for the Knicks, as part of our Off the Air podcast series. He's a Fordham alum, but also he has a unique perspective on fanless games. The Knicks are about to play in an empty Madison Square Garden in all likelihood for an NBA season, and he'll have a lot on that. So two interesting guests, but Chris, I think we're going to hit on next that initial point about COVID-19 and how it's continuing to ravage our leagues, the National Football League. And I'm taken aback by what Roger Goodell is saying, evaluating how his league has responded to the COVID-19 pandemic and evaluating how it will have a path forward moving towards the postseason, because we are in week 13 in the NFL and it is nothing short of an absolute mess. That's coming up next. We have Andrew Posadas headlines later in the hour. Stephanie Gately, Mike Walszewski as our guests. It's Emmanuel Berberi and Chris Baccia. We're here on One on One.
Be sure to follow WFUV Sports on all of our social media platforms. At WFUV Sports on Twitter, at WFUV_sports on Instagram, and WFUV Sports on Facebook and YouTube. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
YouTube and Facebook Live. Emmanuel Barbari with Chris Baccia. Chris previewed it before the break. The most out-of-touch commissioner in the history of professional sports, Roger Goodell, made this unbelievably comical statement this week when reacting to the National Football League and the recent surge in COVID-19 cases. And for context, this wasn't as much of a discussion in the beginning of the season because we weren't getting 80 to 100 cases in a week. But the NFL just had a situation where the Ravens and the Steelers, a game that should have been prime time on Thanksgiving and probably should have been prime time over the weekend, and if they were going to push it back again, should have been prime time any night they put it, played at 3:50 on a Wednesday and was utterly compromised. Chris, tell me if I'm wrong. That game was a complete joke, not only in terms of on-field product and the dullness of that game as compared to what we should have saw, but the integrity of the competition. No one was there. Am I wrong?
No, you're right. You're right. You don't have Lamar Jackson on the field. You don't have a Pittsburgh-Baltimore showdown as we would have imagined. First of all, 3:50 on a Wednesday afternoon. No one's watching that game. I don't know who's watching a game at that.
Completely terrible.
I mean, people work during those hours. It was delayed 3 times and postponed 3 times. And this is a tone-deaf commissioner who just is missing the mark, illusory about how he views this. And we've witnessed this with some leaders who can't quite grasp what we're actually facing. He appears to be one of them. He runs a $15 billion or more industry here. And this is a guy that I could go down the list of things where truth has not been the priority. And, he's been a disgrace to the job of leading the National Football League for a long time.
So let me get you the quote.
Get the quote, yeah.
Roger Goodell says, quote, "We feel strongly that our protocols are working. I don't see us doing a bubble in the way the media is talking about it." So, all right. The NFL has steered clear of using a bubble for their season. That makes sense. I'll start off by saying that. There are 50-plus person rosters in the National Football League. You have a lot of teams. You have a lot of locations. It would be a logistical nightmare to pull off over the course of a regular season. The fact it's not being entertained for the postseason, when you've seen every league find the need to do it, and you've seen massive success in pulling it off. Aside from a couple blips, Justin Turner, whatever you want to point out with Major League Baseball, they pulled it off, no problems. NBA, flawless. NFL's not considering it when you just had a game where not only do you look tone deaf, Roger Goodell, with that quote, your league looks completely out of touch with what the fan needs and wants. You had to postpone a Thanksgiving game. You didn't play it over the weekend. You didn't play it on Monday. You didn't play it on Tuesday. You played it on Wednesday as a precursor to the Rockefeller Christmas tree lighting on NBC. That's what you did. And NBC and the league, so concerned with what the fan wants and needs and desires, the Ravens-Steelers game precedes the tree lighting and is played during rush hour on a Wednesday afternoon. So it's not working. And I'll put the ratings, I'll put the TV, I'll put the appeal aside. That cannot be the way you play the game. Because if Lamar Jackson's not going to play, if 10-plus players aren't going to play on the Baltimore side, if that was a playoff game, it would have been a disgrace. You can't do that moving forward. You need to do a postseason where 0 players are testing positive. So whatever you got to do, that can't be the quote. That can't be the reaction. You need to get it together so we can see an integrity-filled postseason. I can't see games where one of the 10 best players in the league isn't playing with pivotal implications. That is robbing me as a sports fan. That is robbing the average football fan. It's robbing the person who's waited so long to see National Football League play during this difficult year.
Yeah, let me take a little bit of a different angle here. The league, I don't know that they value a midseason game like Pittsburgh and Baltimore, especially a Baltimore team that hasn't been as competitive. Although I would imagine this game would have been a dogfight, and a Steelers team that's undefeated. I understand the urgency to just make it happen if it's possible, even without the personnel, because I'm not exactly sure what you're proposing if they should have just saved this game for later. And I don't know logistically how it happens. They want to make sure that every team plays a full schedule. What I think is more egregious is a Denver Broncos team that's forced to play with Kendall Hinton at quarterback, an undrafted wide receiver. That to me is crazy, but you could tell that not all games are created equal. This is the Broncos and the Saints, and not a lot of bettors. I mean, certainly bettors have money on it, but not a lot of intrigue behind that game. Thanksgiving game to me is unfortunate. I do think the NFL will do an about face on a bubble, and I think that their hand will be forced, because you're absolutely right. Nobody wants to watch a playoff game where, let's say, Aaron Rodgers can't be playing quarterback for the Green Bay Packers. That would be absurd. So I know that they'll do what they can to avoid a circumstance like that. I don't even think we mentioned at the top here, 86 new positive cases reported on the 2nd of December, a couple days ago. 86. That's
not
a
acceptable.
Crazy number.
Not acceptable. And you can throw these players are healthy at me. You could throw the survival rate at me. I've heard all of the counter arguments. 86 is not an acceptable number. If you want to give me one or two based on what the NFL is doing, fine. But you can't have that happening. And Chris, I'm not only talking about a midseason Ravens-Steelers game. I'm taking everything that had to happen to make that game happen. The quote from Goodell mixed in where he says they're not entertaining a bubble, and the fact that it just keeps spiraling out of control, how am I to believe that it won't be a problem moving forward? And the reason baseball and basketball made the wise decision to go that route is, they couldn't be in a scenario where one of their star players, one of their meal tickets, wasn't playing on the biggest stage, and the fans felt like they were robbed out of it, because there's no bigger travesty than not getting the matchup you deserved. If Clayton Kershaw tests positive for COVID before his start in the World Series, that's no longer the World Series game. If LeBron James test positive before Game 3 of the NBA Finals, is it an NBA Finals? I had the theory back in the summer that they would move that series back. As comical as it sounds, they could not play it without LeBron James. Our headlines guy, Andrew Posadas, is here. Andrew, I'm sure you have some strong thoughts about
I would
NBA.
just say this, fellas. I think the players are in such a compromising situation if you think about it, because the NFL is basically giving them the proverbial middle finger. If they have positive cases and they're missing half of their starters, they have to go out there and play at a competitive disadvantage. And for the players, you kind of have no choice, because if you cancel any games or if any team forfeits, neither team gets a check for that week. So, E-Man, I really think at the end of the day, Roger Goodell could talk like this because he has the players right where he wants them. They're in a compromising situation, and they really have no choice but to either play at a competitive disadvantage at any given week, or play without, or not play and not get paid, which for these players during this pandemic can't happen. You can't miss out on game checks.
And it shouldn't surprise any of us, because I've said this for the longest time. NFL players have never, ever had a fair they've never had a fair deal with the NFL. Look at baseball when the pandemic hit. I mean, the players, they were at the negotiating table for months before they played to get their terms. NFL players, you don't even hear about a players association. It is like the weakest PA that I've ever heard of.
You never hear about it. And Chris,
what is that?
These contracts are disgusting too. You look at what the NFL does on a yearly basis. Their best players what is a third of their money guaranteed?
It's
Would
crazy.
that ever happen in another league?
It's criminal. And you're talking about the players who put the most on the line, not just on a game-to-game basis, but on a lifelong basis. We know about the long-term effects of this game on the brain. And then the numbers are startling. The average NFL player living to something like 55 years of age. Startling. And these players, they don't get full checks. If they get hurt, they can get cut. They don't get guaranteed cash. And yes, I know what perhaps a casual sports fan will observe when they hear this. Oh, you're gonna cry pity for rich guys. Well, I'm just gonna be honest with you. Yes, the top of the league is rich, and you'll see the big figures. Dak Prescott is going to get a big contract, even though he's hurt. But you're going to see, a lot of these guys have big contracts, especially the quarterbacks. But the rank and file National Football League player is not making money like that, and they are making good money, but they can only count on that money for probably 3 years because the average NFL player leaves the league after 3 years. So a bit of a rant there, but bottom line is they don't get a fair shake to begin with. And it shouldn't surprise any of us that this has been the sport that has been league first. And I have to question some of the outside observers like us, the media, which has a responsibility to sort of look into this. I wonder to what extent people are going to look the other way or have been looking the other way, because this industry stretches into massive television deals. You're talking about people whose livelihoods are on the line. Their livelihood is the National Football League. This league literally creates jobs and puts, meals on people's tables, producers, people that we have met along our time in the industry. And so I understand why it is such a hard thing to touch.
Yeah, all points aside, they have the players exactly where they want them. And the problem arises, they are now completely off base in terms of what the fan wants. And I'm not sure if they have that in mind, if they will bear that in mind when making their future decisions. I don't trust them to. But as long as they are taking advantage of the players, getting what they want, getting the games in, I'm not sure if they worry about the integrity on the field. I'm not sure if they worry about, do they worry about an Aaron Rodgers missing a playoff game?
They certainly do. They certainly do.
Will that be, they may care about it, but will that be the decision that comes about?
Well, so I'm kind of curious what you're proposing. Do you think that in that event, well, first of all, would it be right for the league to discriminate against which players matter more? If an Aaron Rodgers was hurt, should the league institute a cancellation? I mean, they have to have uniform policies. It wouldn't be fair. They didn't treat the, Drew Lock having to sit out with any care. So would it be fair if they said the Green Bay Packers aren't going to play because Aaron Rodgers? I don't think it is. I don't think that they can institute a policy like that. Is that what you are proposing? Should a game be postponed in that situation?
I don't think a league would ever have a policy like that, but we see it time and time again where leagues value certain teams and players over others. So I think it would be almost an indirect action. We were talking before about how some teams, some matchups are valued over others, and you were saying before, Chris, you're not as concerned that these are mid-year matchups. They're week 13 rather than the postseason. I'm not sure what the answer is. I just worry that the overall decision and what the NFL does next, they may not think it impacts exactly how we'll be consuming these playoff games and the games that matter most. But they haven't shown any interest in making it right and making sure that the fans have confidence that their interest is in the right fashion.
No, I think the answer, I think we agree, is that it would be a bubble when the postseason comes along. And it certainly is a logistical headache, but they are going to have to move toward that. They're going to have to admit that it's the reality, because it is their worst nightmare. A backup quarterback starting a big playoff game is not something that they want to see. If it happens, it happens. And this is a year where we knew it would happen. It's still going to get a lot of eyes. It's still an NFL playoff game. I think the goal for them is just to they've done a, you know, it's been, I don't want to call it dishonest, but somehow we're at a point where it doesn't seem like most people are in tune with how bad the surge of COVID cases in the NFL has been, nearly 90 this week. And it's just sort of missed in what's going on. I think it needs to be said. And the league, especially when we you know, unfortunately what we face ahead appears to be very bad, perhaps as bad or worse than what we experienced in the spring. If that happens, and when that happens, the whole posture is going to have to be different. The NFL might have to take a full week or a 2-week pause to get their stuff together. They have to be ready to do that, and they have to prioritize public health, because there's a lot of people associated with this sport who come into contact with these players, talking about staff, and then they go home to families, and it can't be taken lightly just because we're talking about young men in the best shape and best health of their life. There are other people who are connected to this sport who are critically important, and it needs to be taken into account.
So will Roger Goodell wake up and see the light? I think that's the main question we'll be monitoring moving forward. You just heard from Andrew Posadas a couple of minutes ago on this topic. He's going to join us next for our headline segment, our first of the day. There is a little bit more COVID-19 implications here, but we have some NBA headlines, some college basketball headlines tonight, plenty to dive into. We'll talk to Coach Gately, Fordham women's basketball, in about half an hour. It's one-on-one. We're with you until 2 a.m. on FUV. One-on-One has a brand new YouTube channel. Subscribe to WFUV Sports to catch our simulcast Saturday nights and get notifications so you never miss another show. Miss the show? You can find on-demand segments, interviews, and highlights every week. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Running call-in sports show. This is One-on-One alongside Emmanuel Berbari and Chris Baccia. And if you love basketball, this headline segment is for you. Let's dive into everything happening in the basketball world today, up prominent, noteworthy, allure, and everyone. Let's start off first with the NBA. Guys, they released their first half of the 2020-2021 regular season on Friday on ESPN's The. As far as we know, the season does begin December 22nd with a doubleheader. The first half will run through March 4th, fellas. And the schedule for the second half, which will start March 11th and run through May 16th, that will be released towards the end of the first half portion of said schedule. Each team will play 37 to 38 games during the first half, which includes a minimum of 17 home games and a maximum of 20. And nearly 52% of all regular season games have been scheduled for this first half. and the NBA is taking steps to reduce travel, we'll see almost a baseball version of a series mode where teams will play the same team twice in the same market. And this is obviously to minimize and obviate any sort of significant COVID-19 risk that will happen during the first half. So, Eman, I'll start with you. What do you think about the NBA releasing just the first half of their schedule and kind of playing it by ear as they navigate throughout the pandemic?
That was going to be my one bone to pick, actually. So when I saw the schedule released, I was all jacked up to see the matchups and what's in store and how the NBA would be handling what's going to be a season we haven't seen before, because the only basketball action we saw after COVID-19 hit was the bubble. And that was completely different from what we're going to be seeing with NBA actually returning to each team's arenas and playing at home venues. I was all jacked up to see it, but then I only saw half. So let me clarify. We're not going to see that second half of the schedule until the midway point of the season. Is that correct?
Yes.
I'm not sure what that means, what that foretells. I think if you're making a commitment to play an entire season and not leave it open to discussion, not leave it open to disaster, and the last thing we need is another sports league on hold, you release that full schedule altogether. So that was the one concern I had when I saw the schedule. I'm sure they will be releasing that second half schedule at some point. I'm sure they are holding on to it and maybe just aren't shoving it in our face right now. But when you don't release half of a schedule, what kind of commitment are you making to the league and making sure that you see this season through to the end?
Well, I think it's a more realistic commitment. It's perhaps being a little bit more realistic than we just talked about the NFL and how they seem to be unaware of the circumstances, at least the commissioner. This is a league that seems to be a little bit more in touch with the fact that we are going to be in a figure it out as you go scenario. And I think they're just leaving their cards on the table to have a shortened regular season. The NBA, to me, doesn't require the 81 game season. I don't. It's not a sport that I particularly, and I'm not the biggest basketball fan, but not a sport that I'm typically really paying so much attention to until we do get to the postseason. I mean, of course, the regular season is critical to decide how everybody is seated, but it doesn't depend on a full schedule. So perhaps the concept is to be able to get to the playoffs early, if that's the best public health measure. You saw baseball release their full 162 game season, I think, in August, which was sort of a show of confidence, and that made a lot of sense at the time. Here's the full schedule. We're going to do the whole thing in 2021. I understand the desire for some kind of confident overture. This is what we're going to do. We're ready to do it. I think the NBA is being realistic in saying we can't promise that we're going to get a full 81 games in this year.
Here's my issue, though. You should be able to promise. And I'm not saying that COVID-19 isn't going to be with us throughout this season. It's going to be a challenge, no doubt about it. The NBA is going to look things in the face that they haven't looked at in their history. But at what point do you just need to release a schedule and say, hey, put your money where your mouth is? We're going to do this thing. Because Major League Baseball better have 162 games in 2021. But COVID-19 may not be in a good spot right now, but I would say we are looking up in the sense that a workable vaccine is on the way. You're going to be in a scenario probably by early to mid 2021 where a pivot to normalcy is in order. So you can't release a full schedule after putting yourself through all those precautions throughout 2020 and taking it as seriously or more serious than any other league. Why shouldn't there be the utmost certainty where you can release, let's say, a 72 game schedule? and say, here it is, we're playing. Major League Baseball did it with 162 before we even knew that COVID would maybe be behind us in 2021. And I think once that vaccine is out and it's proven effective, if you're not returning to normal then, when is it happening? So I think that's the weird nature of this release that I just don't get is we need a full NBA season. It's a foregone conclusion. Give it to us.
I would say this if I could, E-Man. I think the NBA, you guys mentioned how great of a job they did in the bubble. They're not going to be in the bubble. Players don't want to be in there for a 72-game season and the postseason. So I think the NBA, they understand that no matter what happens, inevitably, games will be postponed and rescheduled. That's why more than half of their schedule is going to happen in this first half and why the second half goes through May 16th. So you're giving yourself some leeway to reschedule any games that you end up missing from December 22nd up to March 11th, up until the All-Star break. So I think for the NBA, it's realistic, as Chris mentioned. You want to make sure you at least give yourself some space to reschedule any games because we get down to this expanded playoff between seeds 7 and 10. If the 9th or 10th seed loses 3 games and they're down, let's say 4 or 5 games to get to that magic number of 2 games back, and they can't play those games or make those games back up, I mean, Chris, there's going to be teams that have a gripe with that. So I think Adam Silver really is just covering all of his bases here and making sure that teams have enough time to make up games and so that there's some integrity to this shortened season.
So by not releasing the second half, you're buying yourself time to make up games, you're saying?
Well, yeah, because there's going to be games that end up getting rescheduled, man. I can't imagine that all of these games in the first half get played. So if you're going to wait, you're going to include some of those games that need to be rescheduled in between March 11th and May 16th. So I think that is, I mean, they could, if they went out and said, here's all 72 games from now until May 16th, I'm sure fans would be more confident. But again, knowing what the pandemic is and what it's done to other sports, you can't blame the NBA for saying, here's our first half, and then we're going to work around that before we release our second half schedule.
I think I'm going to say this. I think that E-Man is having his cake and eating it too here, where he's criticizing the National Football League for being overzealous in its approach and then criticizing the NBA for being a little bit more measured in its approach. I think those are sort of contradictory.
I'm an in-between guy.
I don't know if you could draw that line.
I like reason. I like taking the
That's
past.
what the NBA is doing. They're being reasonable. They are being measured in their approach.
No, what you're saying is that they're being too cautious, and I'm criticizing them for that. And that's exactly what I think they're doing. I think they're going a little too crazy here when ultimately there's going to be a 2020-21 season. Us as the consumers, we need to know. We need to know what's going on. And basically what they've told us by doing this and only releasing half the schedule is, okay, 0 fans this year, not happening. Even though I would think some teams are going to want to get some fans in the arena as the season moves along. No fans. We don't care about you. You don't get to know the second half of the season. You don't get to know what's going on. And that matters.
Well,
you want to know why Major League Baseball releases 2021 in the middle of 2020? So the fans can get caught up. People need time to figure out their plans for the season.
Why? No, but why? I don't understand why. I don't understand why. I mean, I'm not hinging. I'm not, on the edge of my seat to know who the Mets are going to play in August of 2021. I haven't.
Are you a season ticket holder?
I am not a season ticket holder. The reality of putting people in the seats, we know how difficult that is, especially with a league that's going to tip off in the winter. Baseball, they're going to start in April, and they have an outdoor venue. That's also critical. I think the NBA is a little bit more realistic here, and the idea that they're not releasing the second half does not preclude the idea of getting fans in the seats. They haven't said that at all. I don't know where you're reading that.
All right, guys, hold on.
I think it does. I think that creates a major obstacle where now fans have no idea who their team is playing in the second half of the season. How outrageous
But
is that?
who would buy tickets to a second half game right now anyways, with what's going on?
That may not be what you do, but there's a reason why they release the schedules early
right.
in these leagues so people can make a plan.
Okay.
I want to, if I'm a hardworking individual who has a family, I want to know exactly which day I can go to Madison Square Garden.
I'm going to need my producer, Alex
I
Walls,
think
to
that's crazy.
mute Emmanuel. E-Man, you should get muted. Let me be a pro and transition into my next headline, because Emmanuel is definitely being unreasonable. You know who else is being unreasonable right now heading into the season? The Brooklyn Nets point guard, their star,
Correct.
Kyrie Irving. On that same show on ESPN's The Jump, Brian Windhorst reported that Irving will conduct a, quote, media blackout this season, with him releasing a statement on Friday, not giving much more clarity. Instead of talking to reporters on Zoom, he released a statement, and part of that statement said, quote, "My goal this season is to let my work on and off the court speak for itself." The Nets open up preseason December 13th against the Wizards. Chris, Kyrie has been in so much talking about the earth is flat. Just in Boston, he saw himself out with the younger stars there. And he just has been getting heckled. Obviously, he didn't want to go into the bubble, spoke about how there are more important things at hand. And he's just really gotten the backlash of the media. What do you think about him making this decision, this kind of cryptic message that he won't be talking to the media this season?
Well, it's a little bit concerning to me. I mean, I understand that Kyrie Irving is sort of on his own boat, and not that others would follow his model here, but there's a reason that the media gets a chance to ask questions that, after, of course, a player gets to say his piece, and then the media kind of gets to butt in and ask the questions about something that he may not have addressed. Nobody in there, in his, what he's going to do here is release prepared statements, as I understand it. I mean, that's not how this works. You have to respond to the fire. You have to speak to the media. I understand that's kind of going to be our perspective from the seats that we sit in, but I don't know how a player releasing prepared statements is really not going to answer any question. It's just going to set the narrative. Everybody's got to take the fire. That stretches the board. That's the job of the media, and he's not going to enable them to do their job. And I think that's really unfortunate.
Kyrie Irving has zero credibility, so I can't even take this statement that seriously, because I don't think by mid-season, when we get that second half dump of the schedule, by the time we get there, he will not be staying consistent with this message. He will be talking to the media. He will be doing what's required of him, because this is also a guy, if we recall, who thought the world was flat, and also a guy who said, "We don't have a head coach. It's a collective effort." These are messages that are so beyond the norm and so absolutely outrageous that I don't even know how to process them when I see them, and also just bear no semblance of reality. So I don't want to take it seriously. I don't think anyone should be taking it seriously, and I think the Nets are in for a rude awakening if you have guys like Kyrie Irving not talking to the media, leaving his teammates out on an island to answer for him when he has a bad game or a bad performance. And you also have guys like Kevin Durant saying, "Oh, I enjoyed my vacation. I enjoyed my time away from getting asked questions." I just don't think, as much as they want to give that appearance that everything's fine and they'll let their players mesh and play together, as much as they want to give that appearance, I don't think that's fine. And I think every recipe for disaster you see in a locker room is what the Nets are basically presenting to us before the season even begins. I'd be shocked if they get through this season without some big time turmoil in that locker room. And I've long had takes that I don't think this is going to work out in Brooklyn. As much as people think it's sexy, Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, I don't think it's going to work out. And I think there's actually a high probability that not only is their locker room troubles, but both guys don't see the floor at the same time. And I think that's very possible due to their durability concerns. So that's aside from the point. I don't like what's going on in Brooklyn as much as other people do, but don't worry about Kyrie Irving. A guy who thinks the world is flat and thinks a head coach doesn't exist on his own team when they just hired one is not the guy who should be telling you how to handle the media.
Yeah, I just can't imagine that Kyrie could be so fed up with the media. A lot of this relationship, the criticism that he's gotten over the years has been self-inflicted. So at the end of the day, you can't really go into what is he going to be Marshawn Lynch and go up to every Zoom conference and answer by saying, I'm just here so I won't get fined. Like at some point, you have to understand that you're going to have to get back on the court. You're going to have to pair it with KD, and this Nets team is supposed to be a championship contender. So if they fall short of those expectations, him alongside of Kevin Durant, they're going to have to talk and really explain where the shortcomings are coming from. So I think he wants to talk on the court, and I respect that. He's been injured. You want to make your play. You kind of want to send that message, send that statement on the court. That's fine. But if this team doesn't live up to the expectations that everyone has placed upon them, then we're going to have to hear from you off the court, Chris, where you're going to have to hold yourself accountable, And I think that's one thing that Kyrie Irving has really yet to do is hold himself accountable when he's been held to the fire.
That's exactly right. That's where I was going to go with this, is that a team leader stands by his locker when the team takes a tough loss, the wins and the losses. But it's very important that, especially if you're serious about making a run for a championship, it's got to stand by his locker, and the media knows where they go first. They talk to him and they get his perspective on what the team did and what went wrong. And he's got to own it. That is the job. That's the job. And if he's not going to do that job, then you're absolutely right, Emmanuel. There's going to be locker room problems because Kevin Durant's going to get asked about what went wrong and is going to have to answer for Kyrie Irving, and it's going to be a locker room problem. This is traditional. There's a reason that nobody's ever thrown the norm into question of reporters going up to a star player and asking what went wrong. You see LeBron James do it all the time. He doesn't like doing it, but it's his job. It's his job. It's what a leader does. And Kyrie Irving's going to have to do it.
And especially in this year where it's not your typical reporter approaching you in the locker room situation.
Right.
Basically what you're doing, unless this changes and the NBA changes its protocol ahead of the coming season, you're heading to a press conference room as you would in the postseason, and you are talking to reporters through Zoom. It's not a particularly hard task.
Yeah.
It's not lifting weights. It's not this taxing situation where you have to go up to an individual reporter and they're grilling you with questions. So what Kyrie Irving is basically saying is, screw you. I'm not doing anything. And the fact that he can't even comply with the easiest softballish scenario that athletes have ever had to go through, which is Zoom press conference type settings, I think it's embarrassing. I really do.
Yeah, and guys, before we get up out of here, I want to give you guys one last headline because I think you guys will appreciate this. The WNBA draft lottery happened on Friday night, and the New York Liberty, they won for the second consecutive year and for the second time in franchise history. They obviously drafted Oregon's Sabrina Ionescu last year. But I bring this up, E-Man, because we saw in the NHL, the New York Rangers, they got the number one pick. Now the Liberty get the number one pick. E-Man, does that mean that the New York Jets, are you confident that they will follow through and give New York another number one overall pick?
Sure, I'm confident, but I don't think it's anything to celebrate. I think we've gotten way too excited in this town about, hey, we got the number one pick. We're headed in the right direction. If we've learned anything as Jets fans, that means absolutely zilch until they make serious changes within the organization and start getting serious about building a successful football team. So, yes, I think it bodes well. I'm happy that the Liberty have the number one pick. It means they're going to be loaded for years to come. I'm very excited about that. Maybe they'll be a competitive team in this area while the Jets figure their scenario out, and maybe the Johnsons can get together and figure out how to sell the team. But really, I'm not excited about number one picks. And we'll get into this later in our Jets segment. I think we've gotten way too comfortable in this town with, let's tank. Oh, let's get this young talent. We'll get to the promised land. Not how it works 99% of the time.
That's been the Jets story for too long. You know, the key is not having the pick. The key is getting the pick right. And you've seen them have a lot of high picks. Number 3 pick, Sam Darnold. Number 6 picks, Leonard Williams. And you've seen him miss. Number 9 pick, D. Milner, miss. So having the high pick doesn't mean anything if you can't get it right. We haven't seen him in the number 1 slot, which will sort of hopefully make their lives easy and make the selection easy. But, you know, the point is that with all the picks that they've had surrounding what will hopefully be Trevor Lawrence in a New York Jet uniform, although I'm not convinced because things can go awry. The Jets can win a game, and they're the type to do that. You know, they're the type to ruin the whole thing. We've watched them lose for 10 straight weeks, but then they'll win. And then potentially Jacksonville has the tiebreaker, so that's a nightmare scenario. The other scenario is that they get the 1 pick, which we've been talking about for so long, and they use it for Trevor Lawrence, and the team stinks regardless because there's nobody else good in the locker room.
Oh, you didn't just make a prediction; you stated a fact. They will not be a good football team next year.
Correct.
E-Man, this is what I'm saying, though. When you think about New York and number 1 picks, I only think about Patrick Ewing. That's it. I mean, New York has been devoid of number 1 picks. So the fact that we have 2, and the Knicks, if you're a Knicks fan, you've been hoping for a number 1 pick since Patrick Ewing, and you've been screwed over year after year. So the fact that the Rangers get number 1, the Liberty get number 1, I think it bodes well. It gives you something to talk about. And if you're a Jets fan, which I'm not, thank the Lord, you need something to talk about, because at this point, if it's not Gase or Darnold apologizing again for another week's worth of trash performance, you need something, E-Man. And I feel like this number 1 pick, that's something at least you could hold on to, whether it's Trevor Lawrence or whether you trade it and get a boatload of picks. At least you have something you can work with come draft night.
Well, Andrew, you're glass half full, and I appreciate that. I'm taking the glass half empty of we've reached a new low in New York sports where we are actually talking about 2 number 1 picks like it could be a positive. I think the fact we haven't had many number 1 pick successes aside from Patrick Ewing, that speaks to the success of New York sports in the past. Right now, we're going on about a decade without a championship in this town. And we're at a point now where we need to completely revive several franchises. Long for the days where the Knicks are competitive and competing with the Bulls in the Eastern Conference Finals. The Mets are competing in the 1986 World Series. The Yankees are rattling off championships in the late 90s. The Giants are going to Super Bowls and winning them. And the Jets maybe are not winning a Super Bowl, but at least playing competitive football in the month of December, if that's too much to ask. So that's how I view this. It's been too long having a multitude of competitive franchises in this town.
Well, a last word here. When the Jets did have the number 1 overall pick and Peyton Manning was this big quarterback coming out of Tennessee, well, he stayed an extra year. Archie Manning got in his ear and told him, you don't want to play for this team. So the Jets managed to miss that one too. Then he went on to build a Hall of Fame career with the Indianapolis Colts. So even with the number 1 overall pick in sight for the New York Jets, I'm not counting my chickens before they come to roost, before they hatch.
Let's hope there's not another Archie Manning to Trevor Lawrence.
I think a lot of Jets fans have been waiting for their chickens before they hatch. I think that's the problem.
Andrew, thanks so much. Speaking of women's basketball, though, and the Liberty with the number 1 pick, we have a women's basketball team on campus. It is the Fordham Rams. Their season is underway despite all the craziness with COVID-19, but it will continue to rear its ugly head as the season moves along. How are they going to navigate that? How have they gotten the team ready? Head coach Stephanie Gately in her 10th season. She's going to join the show next. Keep it locked right here. It is midnight. Happy Sunday here on One on One.
To To support the WFUV Sports Department, visit support.wfuv.org to become a member or make a one-time donation. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener-supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org. This is One on One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org. One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show. Emmanuel Barbari joined by Chris Baccia. Special guest, Fordham women's basketball head coach Stephanie Gately in her 10th season with the Rams. Coach, thanks for being with us.
Oh, my God. It's always a pleasure. I love being with you guys.
Coach, the start of a very unique season. You had the win over Stony Brook. You had a postponement against Manhattan. How's the team been adapting to these challenging times?
Very resilient group. I mean, I told him after Stony Brook, I felt that we had two wins. One, obviously the game itself, but two, having the opportunity to play the game. Just being able to win, staying healthy, and staying virus-free, so to speak. And it's difficult. I mean, as the numbers are increasing, my son's team from Richmond, after they beat Kentucky, just went into shutdown too. And I know how disappointed he was. And it just, it's just you've got to stay resilient and you've just got to stay patient. It's changing every day. So hopefully with the vaccine, on its way, things will brighten up.
Coach, I want to ask you about a former member of your team, Bryson Kavanaugh, who came out as transgender this year. And what was it like for you as the coach and the leader of this team to be able to embrace him and accept him and move forward now without him? What's it been like as a team for you in this moment?
Well, I mean, it kind of caught us off guard, just because it happened when we got back, and I was in quarantine when it happened. Like when Bryce, left campus, I was coming back from my son's wedding. So for 2 weeks coming back from Texas, I had to stay in quarantine. So it caught me off guard just because Bryson had been in our workouts and had done a great job and didn't seem to be any issues. And so it kind of, took us all a little bit by surprise. But the number one thing is his happiness. The number one thing, like anything, is for your players. They're like your kids, and you want them to be happy and be successful. And if that's what makes him happy, then I'm all for being supportive.
From a purely basketball perspective, you lose the A10 Player of the Year. How's the team's approach changed at all, if anything?
Oh, man, I think at first it's obviously a gut check because, Bree was Player of the Year and now being Bryson, it changed. It changed. Now we score by committee, right? Like in the Stony Brook game, Anna had a great first half. Caitlin had a great second half, and that was a bright spot because we were able to do it with really Kenny not scoring. And so I think once it took us a couple weeks to kind of adjust our kind of mindset. And I think then once we settled in, I think the kids realized, and I think that the Stony Brook game was a great shot in the arm. I mean, they had the third longest nation's winning streak at home, and to be able to do that on the road, and especially after having a big lead, losing it kind of, I'm sure the kids all kind of started thinking back to the ECU game and like, oh my gosh, and be able to have them, make that run, and for us to sustain through that, I thought was a big step forward for us.
Our guest is Florida women's basketball head coach Stephanie Gately here on One. Coach, flashing back, you mentioned the VCU game that ended last season, then the COVID outbreak, and then you really don't have much interaction in person with your team for about 4 or 5 months. How are you able to keep tabs on the group during that stretch apart?
Well, I mean, I've always been a big proponent of communication, and this time we had to be obviously really creative. So obviously there's a lot of Zooms, but in all honesty, I thought that I got to know our players better this summer than I ever have, just because one thing, I made myself available to them. I was calling them on a regular basis, reaching out on a regular basis, and it had nothing to do with basketball workouts. It was really about how are you and how's your family and what are you gaining that's positive out of this situation. And I would tell the kids all the time, we got to win the weight, the weight of getting to play again. And the teams that stay together and stay in shape and stay focused. And I thought the staff did an incredible job. I mean, they reached out and found out what each player had access to at their house, what kind of weights, or did they have a basket, and they made the workouts according to what the players had. And so I think we answered the bell, so to speak, as far as being creative and being patient and being kind, and these kids, it's a whole new world. I mean, I've never been through something like this. And, for them, I think it's challenging. And, as you guys are young kids too, being on campus and even talking to my own son at Richmond, it's just like, what are you doing? Nothing, nothing. Usually, it's heading down to the bar, or whatever, on a weekend, but nothing, staying home. So I just, we did a call every week with the team. And, when we were going through the George Floyd situation, I thought we did a lot of good things to kind of get more familiar with that situation. It was eye-opening in so many ways. Aside from the virus, you had that, and then you had the election, and so gave us opportunity to educate each other and become more familiar with kind of current event things as well.
Coach, continuing to be ready to adjust for anything, because you've already had a game canceled against Manhattan, which would have been Wednesday. Of course, Quinnipiac is next, but what's your posture right now with the team, being ready for anything to potentially change, to lose a game, to have to go a stretch without playing for a little while? How are you communicating with your team about being sort of ready for any scenario right now?
It's basically saying day to day, like every day, like I tell the kids, like even from a playing standpoint, it's just be thankful we're here to play. So everything we're attacking is a day to day. I mean, I think all coaches, we did our third test for the week, in line with what we're supposed to do for playing a game. And as a coach, you kind of hold your breath, making sure that we're going to get cleared to play, and so it's really about being patient. I mean, faith is a big part of who I am. So, I mean, there's so many things in this situation you can't control. So you kind of have to make sure that you're giving the kids the opportunity to be educated on everything. I mean, like Thanksgiving is a great example. Like, I know a lot of schools didn't let their kids go home. And I just felt like, gosh, we talk about the mental health of these kids, and to miss a family opportunity. And I told the kids that, I said, listen, there's no way I want to take that away from you, but you also have to understand that it can't be the normal of going to visit friends and going to visit people that you aren't in your circle, because you're putting everybody at risk, not just your team, but other teams and things of that nature. So it's really been one in which we really had to, have some, clear conversations about. But our kids, as you can tell, our kids really want to play and they respect each other. So they're all going to do their part to make sure we're good to go.
Coach Gately with us here on the show. Coach, you mentioned the big season opening win over Stony Brook, the reigning America East champs, and you're trying to get the team off the ground and running here. And it's Wolf, 25 points, top returning scorer to your team. What was the number one positive from that game where you kind of had to grit it out in the second half?
I think the fact that we stayed together when they cut it to 1. I think that was the number one thing. I mean, if you had to say an actual physical thing, it would be rebounding. I was really proud because Stony Brook last year had out-rebounded people by 10. And the fact that we out-rebounded them and actually rebounding ended up being the difference maker as far as picking up an offensive board here or there. And the fact that we were able to win without Kendall. I mean, Kendall has been playing super in our preseason practices and against our scout squad. And, it really affected our rotation because, we've been practicing where they're on the court, and so much of that game she had to be off the court. And so, a lot of kids were thrown into the fire that wouldn't normally be thrown in the fire. Great example, Katie McLaughlin, played 30 minutes, maybe all last year, Katie played 30 minutes. So in the first game, she's playing 30 minutes. So I think different kids stepped up to the challenge. And I think that's going to basically be, kind of the theme that you're going to have all year is different people stepping up in every different game.
Coach, you'll start your conference schedule December 21st against Davidson, shortened out of conference. What are you looking to do as a team before you start conference play? What are your expectations in preparation for the conference schedule?
Well, like I told the kids in the circle today, I mean, we wanted to make it as difficult as we could within the parameters of what we were dealing with. We had to, make day trips, right? So we were asked not to do any overnights in the out of conference schedule. So you're trying to get a balance of strong competitiveness with also building your team. So starting at Stony Brook was a good test. I mean, going to Quinnipiac's another great test. I mean, and then we have Fairleigh Dickinson coming in. Then we're at Seton Hall, which is another big test. And then we have Hofstra at home. So, I don't know if we're going to have the window to reschedule in Manhattan, but we'll have 5 games out of conference that will give us an idea of where we stand. And I think all those games will allow us to know, what we're going to see in conference play.
Coach, we'll leave you with this. You had the A-10 title season, then you go to the Atlantic 10 semifinals. WNIT had COVID not occurred. What's the biggest improvement you look for your team this season? When you reflect on that semifinal loss to VCU, what's your biggest takeaway on an area the team can grow?
Just a killer instinct, like a toughness. And it's such a nice group of kids. And I think, I try to explain to them all the time. I think I'm a nice person, and I think my staff's a nice person, but are nice people. But when we step across the lines, we want to rip your face off. When I played, hey, if you're on my team, I'm going to let you know that you need to do something better. And I want you to let me know I need to do something better. And I think sometimes we're too nice about that. That's an area I think we still need to grow in, because that just means you truly trust in each other. And that's something we're taking steps in. And I think the fact that we're able to practice against our coaches this year due to the new rules with COVID and having Val on the court and Munger and Abigail, yesterday was her last day. But in all honesty, Val, in my opinion, would be the Atlantic 10 player of the year, and Munger and Abigail would be first team. Just they're that good. So we're playing against that competition every day. And so therefore I tell the kids all the time, we're not going to play better against better competition than what we're playing in scout. And of course, throw Jackson in there. And so therefore you've got a really tough team you're going against on a regular basis. And I think that definitely prepares us.
That's Fordham women's basketball head coach Stephanie Gately joining us here on One-on-One. Coach, appreciate a few minutes. Thanks so much, and enjoy the rest of the season.
Well, thanks, guys. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it. It's great seeing you guys, and stay happy and healthy.
Quick break. We'll be back in a couple of minutes here on One-on-One.
To support the WFUV Sports Department, visit support.wfuv.org to become a member or make a one-time donation. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
back. It's One-on-One, New York's longest-running sports college show. It is now Sunday morning. We're with you until 2 o'clock, getting you ready for a football Sunday. Just heard from Fordham women's basketball head coach Stephanie Gately. Chris, my main takeaway is the measures they had to take to prepare the team for this season. I think it's fascinating how coaches have had to change a strategy that they have polished and updated and improved for several years. And for Coach Gately, someone who's really a master at doing that, preparing the team and over the long haul, getting that unit in tip-top shape by the time conference play and postseason play begins. That's completely different this year. And they had to resort to Zoom calls and learning about the players on a personal level and what they were going through. And I think that was really fascinating, hearing about how a team on campus that's dealing with the ramifications of a COVID season got to this point.
And we know what a leader she is. We're well aware. She's a championship coach. And this is a big test for everybody. And I imagine that she answered the call as well as anybody to get an opening night victory. We'll see how the team looks. It's obviously early, but we'll see how they play in Quinnipiac, which she called a big test, and I think she's right. And I'm excited. I'm excited for the team. I'm excited for the chance to have some Fordham athletics going. We'll talk about the men's as well.
For sure, and we're going to talk about that later in the show as well with Andrew Posadas. The men are having all sorts of trouble with getting their season off and running through the fault of no one specifically. Again, when we talk about COVID here, it's such a, I don't know how to put this, Chris, maybe a larger than life type issue where you can't just point to one thing or another thing and say, hey, this is why this is happening. And when you have a player going through their testing protocols and these people are tested frequently over and over again, they can't control sometimes whether that test is going to come back positive. So it's a situation that's larger than any one individual, larger than any one team. And as much as we get frustrated when, for instance, Fordham men's basketball cancels or postpones the first 4 games of the season, which we'll get into, we can't just say, yeah, Fordham can't get it right. It's not a Fordham issue. It's a much larger thing that everyone's still trying to grapple with.
Yeah. And you just can't play that game of pointing the finger. I think even in situations where teams are really following protocols and doing as best as they can, if you're talking about the environment of sports, you're talking about an environment in which containing a spread of an airborne virus would be an uphill battle. I mean, you're talking about gyms, and you're talking about a proximity that you can't prevent in a sporting environment. So I think that leagues and the NCAA and Fordham Athletics were aware of this when they went in, and the key, as it has always been, is when there's a case, containing it, and we've seen that happen in college sports, especially swift and total shutdowns, and unfortunately it's really the only option that these programs have.
So, Chris, let's get a few minutes in here on baseball before we transition back into football and the Gase comments, which definitely took us aback, and the Giants' prospects against the Seahawks this Sunday. And we have that later today now as we are into Sunday morning. And thanks for sticking with us here on FUV. The baseball offseason has hit that point where you're not really sure what the movement is going to entail, because not only are we dealing with an offseason, Chris, where a lot of teams are financially strained from this past season and you don't exactly know how they're going to spend. We really don't know, okay, are players going to stay on the board as long as a Machado or a Harper a couple of years ago? Is it to that extent because of the COVID-19 situation we're in? Or is it a fluid, moving off season where you may have a Christmas present under your tree if you're a Mets fan? And that's normally the way it works with the big ticket items. I'm leaning towards the former, where we may not hear about a George Springer or a Trevor Bauer immediately. The market may run its course, and these players are going to have to gain a better sense of exactly what the interest level is, exactly how far teams are willing to go. And that's where we are. It's an uneasy time, I guess, as a Mets fan, because you are excited. You know Steve Cohen wants to spend. You have your shiny new toy, and every Mets fan loves it. Every Mets fan loves him. You don't know exactly when the dominoes are going to fall yet.
Yeah, you're right. I agree with you that it's the former, the first thing that you mentioned. Certainly you saw it with Machado and Harper, and that was really the beginning of a trend where baseball was already tightening its spending. And what the market is like now is obviously is far worse than it was then. You have teams that are indicating that they won't spend the way they did, but I think that was already setting in. Actually, I'll borrow a piece of wisdom from a guy named Scott Galloway. He's a business professor at the Stern School at NYU, and what he says about the pandemic as far as how it affects markets. And I'll even plug him. He has a great podcast called Pivot. The Pivot.
We should have him on.
Yeah, we should. I think he's a really brilliant business mind, but he talks about everything. And he says that the pandemic, more than anything, has been an accelerant of trends that we already saw. So you saw a massive transition to e-commerce. You saw basically the pandemic has moved every trend that had already set in 10 years forward. So, I digress a little bit, but I think that you saw a trend on spending in MLB. And you'll probably see it accelerated this offseason, where I think a guy like Marcus Stroman, who took the qualifying offer with the Mets, was smart. I think that was the bright move, because it's not going to be a robust market out there. All that being said, I wouldn't really bet on the Christmas present this year for the New York Mets. It might take a little longer. But if there is going to be a team that cashes in before Christmas, it would be the New York Mets, because they don't seem to be, and this is crazy to say, but they don't seem to be inhibited by the market or by even, the 100-year pandemic. They are the one team that seems to be an exception to that. And I don't want to get too out of myself, but they're the first mover on this market. They go out and get Trevor May. So that's certainly a sign. They're talking to Jake Odorizzi, who would be a really nice addition. Looking at catching help, starting pitching help. You mentioned Trevor Bauer, certainly high on the wish list. If there's going to be a team that can cash in early, it would be the Mets, even if it's not them early and they have to wait out the market, which we know Sandy Alderson is willing to do. I think that they will walk out of the offseason and we'll look at what they did and say they did more than anybody in baseball, if I had to bet.
Something that's wild, Chris, that struck me is, if you're a top free agent this year, let's leave aside if you're going to end up in New York Met, if you're going to end up in Flushing, you need the Mets to be involved. The Mets are not only a team that could begin the blockbuster type moves of this offseason, they are the mover of this market.
Right.
If you're Trevor Bauer, and this is wild to say this after years of ineptitude and penny pinching and that kind of thing in Mets land, if you're Trevor Bauer, you want, and you could argue you need, the Mets to be involved, because there are so many teams that are going to try to undervalue and underpay, and the circumstances vary per organization. But Steve Cohen and the Mets, it seems to be the one known of all these unknowns. They're going to spend. They're going to pay players what they're worth, and they will potentially overpay to bring someone like Trevor Bauer into the fold. So regardless of if Bauer ends up in Met, we are now in a situation where the New York Mets are dictating a lot of how this market moves.
Yeah, and it's so good for baseball. It's so good for us here in New York and our market. And myself as a fan couldn't be never have been more excited in my life. But you're also talking about something that's critical for baseball, because if nobody spent, then what happens to a Trevor Bauer? It would really be robbery if he didn't get the multi-year contract that he deserves. And even that, we'll see how the market defines itself. But you're right that the Mets may be the team that does define the market. I'll say this: it's really interesting to see Sandy Alderson almost publicly wooing Trevor Bauer, and Trevor Bauer, one of the more public athletes, using his own platform and even saying, "Yeah, I like what Sandy said about we're in the entertainment business." And you sense that Sandy Alderson is an unleashed personality. He gets to set the terms for how he runs this team as the team president under Steve Cohen, who's gonna cut the check. And that obviously was the opposite of the case when he was with the Wilpons. And you saw a guy who was, you could just sense it in his body language, probably didn't want to be there, and absolutely is a brilliant baseball mind and managed to build a pennant winning team even with those constrictions. Here he is unrestricted, and that's very exciting. The other note on him is that he is running the show. He is running the show because this team does not have a general manager, which in itself is an interesting storyline. That what's happened in baseball is teams are really clamping down on their young talent, promising executives who might be a fit for a general manager spot. They're saying you can't interview my promising young executive. So the Mets really haven't had a lot of access. And I was on the press conference, the Zoom call with Sandy. He really wasn't shy about the fact that we don't have a general manager, so I am running baseball operations here. I don't think that's something that Met fans should be worried about. I think Sandy Alderson's one of the best in the business.
Chris, I was about to ask, were we kidding ourselves to actually think that a GM search was going to happen? Because I feel like this is a Sandy Alderson project. I feel like this is I have the resources now. Let's prove I can produce a champion in my final few years in baseball. Now, I think it would really benefit the Mets in the next couple of years to have a prodigy of sorts under Sandy Alderson and have a mentor-mentee type scenario where someone can take the reins once Sandy Alderson, in an ideal world, produces that championship caliber roster. But I think we were fooled to even think that they were going to get the best and the brightest, like they were saying. I think this is Sandy Alderson's show, and I think it's going to be for the foreseeable future.
I think it is too, and that's probably why it is hard for them to draw the best and the brightest, because anybody who signs up with the Mets knows that they're going to be the number two. And a lot of guys don't want to be the lieutenant. At the same time, it's a very appealing job because Sandy Alderson has indicated, does seem to be the type to take a back seat if it's not this year, the following or the year after that. I mean, he is of advanced age, and I don't imagine him running baseball operations for that long. His capacity as team president, so he seems to be really involved with Steve Cohen and really involved with the business element here, which I'm sure he's learned a lot about over the years. So it's an appealing job because somebody has the chance to be the successor to him. At the same time, I wouldn't make that move knowing that it's the Mets aren't in any rush, put it that way. They're going to wait if they can get somebody, because right now I think they feel secure about Sandy and his lieutenants who he'll bring in. And I was a critic of his at times, but I recognize then, and I recognize even more so now that he had one hand tied behind his back the whole way.
Before we get back to the football prospects for this Sunday, this idea that DJ LeMahieu could possibly not be a New York Yankee this coming season is eating at me. And I don't want to rip the Yankees because of their tendency to deliver and to spend. With the Mets fan in this call and yourself, Chris, I think it's a little colorblind for me to say, oh, the Yankees aren't going to spend. What's going on here? Especially when you just got an owner for the first time in your life who's going to spend on the side of the New York Mets. And the Yankees just spent on Garrett Cole $324 million just last offseason. This does feel weird to me. It just, I don't know what there is about it. There is no fact or trend or sign. Actually, there could be a trend, but there's no fact or indication out there that would lead me to believe they won't re-sign DJ LeMahieu. I have a gut feeling this is not headed in the right direction. And I think this spans back to, I guess, this past season when there were no extension talks. I think the fact that this was a 2-year deal to begin with, and DJ LeMahieu's value has never been higher in his entire baseball career. He's 32 years old. The Yankees have made some weird decisions in the infield over the last couple of years. I feel weird about it. I may sound like a moron saying this. I just feel weird about where this is trending. I see the agent coming out yesterday saying 5 years, $100 million is the demand. I'm sure they'll go below that if no one's going to give it to them. But 5 and 100, an offseason after the Yankees signed Garrett Cole for $324 million, and a couple off seasons away from Aaron Judge and Gleyber Torres and Gary Sanchez. I know Sanchez is a different situation with his struggles. They're going to have to pony up on some of these players soon. 5 years, $100 million. If that's it, I'm not sure DJ LeMahieu's a Yankee this season.
Do you think he should be a Yankee on 5 years, $100 million?
I'd give him a blank check. Yeah, okay. Again, blank check is hyperbole, but I'd give him what he wants because I haven't seen a player like DJ LeMahieu on the Yankees since Derek Jeter. And that's not to say he is Derek Jeter. I have the utmost respect for the core four and the Yankee teams of the past because the Yankee teams of the present haven't had the same postseason success. But the type of player, the no-nonsense, show up and play, great defense, bad on the ball, it's so lacking. It's so refreshing to see for the Yankees. I haven't felt this way about a player in a long time. So if it's 5 and 100, I give it to him. Do the Yankees give it to him? I'm skeptical.
I don't agree with you. I wouldn't be skeptical. I think 5 years, $100 million is due to the guy, something in that ballpark. I mean, I don't think there's a trend here at all either. I mean, unless I'm missing an example, the only one that I have in my head of the Yankees letting a superstar walk is Robinson Cano about 10 years ago. And how wise was that? And again, he was demanding 10 years in the order of $240 million. So you're talking about less than half of that. Unless I'm missing an example, I don't think the Yankees do this. They don't let superstars walk away. They might be because they're smarter than the rest of the league. They might know something that we don't about how this is going to fall into their lap in a better way as far as how much they have to commit to DJ LeMahieu. But when all's said and done, they're going to make DJ LeMahieu a Yankee.
It just feels a little strange. I don't think you're right, Chris. I don't think there's a free agent example I can specifically cite because even a couple of the guys like Max Scherzer, that was when the Yankees were retooling their roster anyway back in, I think, 2014. So
I'm talking about someone that they had and let away,
okay.
Which was Cano, and that was it. And Cano was obviously that was prescient. That was wise.
Correct. I think the examples I can cite recently don't come from the free agent market. It's more like the Yankees have been a little gun shy recently. And Garrett Cole wouldn't indicate that. But they've been a little gun shy when it comes to trade deadlines and going for the killer punch and basically saying, here's our core. We're a 95 to 100 win baseball team at present. We know we're going to be in the ALCS or somewhere deep in the playoffs. Let's make sure this is a championship. I don't think they've done enough of that recently. So those type of hold on to our assets type moves, the Yankees have been a little weird lately. So that's what leads me to believe if they know something or if they have these people in their boardroom saying LeMahieu's not worth $100 million, whatever numbers they're pulling up, I feel like they're the type of organization, they won't let feelings get in the way here. And I have feelings for DJ LeMahieu. I feel a different type of way, but they won't let feelings get in the way. They'll say, DJ, go walk if they don't like the numbers.
But I just don't agree with that. They are not a team that, they're not the Oakland Athletics where they have to look at value in every last dollar. And if it's not a good value, it's not a move we're going to pull the trigger on. You think that they thought Giancarlo Stanton was worth $300+ million? He's not. And they knew it, and they still went and got him.
Oh, I disagree. I think they think he's worth $300 million because their numbers, and their numbers, at least when they got him, their numbers, and whenever you talk to these sabermetrician type people, someone like Stanton at his peak after that MVP season when the Yankees got him. In baseball terms and baseball numbers, that guy's worth like $50 million. He's underpriced in the Yankees.
But he was on a
He's been terrible.
13-year contract. I mean, he was on a 13-year contract.
They don't take years into account. They take the prime value of the contract in the first 5 to 7 years.
You can't tell me that DJ LeMahieu is not worth $20 million. I mean,
He is.
There's no way that there's somebody in the Yankee front office who's coming to that conclusion, who's making that assessment. I couldn't imagine it. And I think where I disagree with you is that even if there was somebody in the front office who pulled it up on his computer, or I don't know, crunched some numbers, that some nerd, if I might suggest it, someone far better with numbers than me. If they came to that conclusion, they would still pay him, and that's I think where I disagree with you. The Yankees are going to make sure that DJ LeMahieu's in pinstripes.
And I'm not sure if this is a completely ignorant take, but $20 million, at least in baseball terms, in this day and age, is that much money?
No, it's not.
It's not. And the fact we're even discussing this, I think, is a little sad. Is it a little bit of a fall from grace here for the Yankees? Because if they don't get this done, this isn't like DJ LeMahieu's running out there after 2 amazing seasons. And this isn't to say LeMahieu wasn't great in Colorado, but he's been a far different player in New York. He has been MVP, top 4 consideration, MVP player 2 years running. So he's not running out there saying, give me 6 over 180, give me $30 million bucks, which he could do, by the way. It would be ridiculous in a lot of ways, but he could do it, especially with the value we're placing on players nowadays. 5 over 100. I've seen terrible players get 5 over 100. CJ Wilson got 6 over 120. Remember that with the Angels? He didn't have one good season with LA.
I mean,
CJ Wilson.
Yeah,
that was 6 years ago.
That was a long time ago. I actually that was the same year they got Albert Pujols, which I remember being a middle school kid when they made that deal, and I can't remember the number they gave him, but that was a time when teams in baseball got excited at the winter meetings and pulled the trigger. It was very exciting being a young kid and hearing about, oh wow, he's going to be in an Angels uniform. It's just, but in any case, I completely agree with you. I think it's a ridiculous conversation that we're even having, that the Yankees couldn't pony up $100 million for him is insane. I mean, I really do want to look into a comparable, because there are guys who are making in the order of $200 million, $300 million out there who are not as good as DJ LeMahieu. I mean, he was one of the best players in the American League this year. There's no question about it. So give him the cash.
Give him some cash. Let's go with the comparable just based on what the Yankees have done recently. I'm not saying this is how they operate analytically now. I'm sure they've learned from this transgression. They gave Jacoby Ellsbury 7 years over 153. Imagine if DJ LeMahieu was asking for that, and that's again without market inflation, without this newborn different valuation of players. Yeah. This is when the Yankees were giving dumb money to people in a lot of senses. 7 over 153. Ellsbury in his career never had a season close to what DJ LeMahieu's done the last 2 years.
Stole a few bases. He stole a few bases. I mean, they got to take him out of Boston. That was the year that they spent on Tanaka as well and Beltran as well, I believe. It is crazy how the sport has changed in its spending ways, and how teams have just kind of clamped down. And again, I mean, we're going to see it even more so this offseason. On your point about the Yankees not having the killer instinct, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I know you're citing the deadline where they were quiet, but was there a market this deadline? I mean, who was the the closer, if you will, not the closer in the ninth inning terms, but who was the 25th or 20, who was the guy, who was the Yoenis Cespedes on this year's market? Unless I'm drawing a blank, I don't think there was. And the Yankees do a very good job at looking at the market and saying, I'm not going to overpay if there's nobody there.
This year was a little different. There was no big ticket item per se, but the Yankees knew they were short on starting pitching. Once Paxton went down, once they started having those issues where Michael King was taking the ball every fifth day, they knew there would be an issue down the line, and they didn't address it. There was a Lance Lynn to be had. Not to say he's this elite stud pitcher, but he's a very good pitcher who would have lined up in that Yankee postseason rotation. So there were opportunities to be had. I think I'm more referencing the last couple of years where maybe they could have gone all in and gotten, let's say, a Max Scherzer at the deadline a few years ago. Or let's go back to 10 years ago. Let's go back to a decade ago when they had an opportunity to repeat as world champs. And all they had to do was part with Jesus Montero to get Cliff Lee. And they didn't do it. And they could have paired CC Sabathia and Cliff Lee. They didn't do it. They're very prospect huggy. And I think that's been the one criticism of Cashman over the last few years. Now, again, when you're prospect huggy, it does induce Aaron Judge and Gary Sanchez and Gleyber Torres sometimes. But once you have Judge and Torres and a core, then you go all in. And I think that's the one critique.
Yeah, I don't know if you're citing an example for me that works for me to agree with you. I hear what you're saying. I think that there is this expectation around the Yankees, especially with some of the things that they did, let's say a decade ago. Let's say, but I wouldn't even say a decade ago. It's ridiculous. They went out and got Garrett Cole last year. They made the deal for Giancarlo Stanton when nobody else in baseball could. Them and the Dodgers. I really when I hear Yankee fans spouting off like this about not that you're spouting off, but when I hear
be fair, Chris.
But even the critique, what's the critique with this team? I mean, there isn't a fair one in my mind. I understand that the Yankee fans wanted to see the team go further this year. I understand that expectation, but this front office has put the team in position to strike each of the last 3 years, and I don't know that there's a critique of that. I really don't.
Here's another. You got Garrett Cole.
Yankee fans always find one. They have some way.
I'm speaking for the Yankee fan here. You got Garrett Cole. He's now in pinstripes, so this hard revisionist history. But in 2018, the Yankees were a 100-win baseball team. Garrett Cole was on the trade market. The Yankees wouldn't part with Clint Frazier to get Garrett Cole. Now Clint Frazier turned into a very, very nice player this year. But is he part of that fabric? Is he part of that core? Is he a guy you could have parted with once you had Judge and Torres and Sanchez and the like? You could have. So these are the minor critiques. Again, these are nitpicks because as a Yankee fan, you have to nitpick. Your goal is a championship. This organization has already put their cards on the table and delivered a winning baseball team for you year in and year out. So I get where you're coming from, Chris. It can get tiresome when you hear Yankee fans complain like this. What I will say is 5 over 100 to DJ LeMahieu. This is a no-brainer. This has to happen. You mentioned Carlos Beltran before in the same breath as the Ellsbury deal. A 37-year-old Carlos Beltran got 3 over 45 from the Yankees. So that's $15 million a year for an aging Carlos Beltran. You're telling me LeMahieu at 32, coming off 2 MVP seasons, and you can fact check me that they weren't MVP seasons. He was an MVP player. $20 million over 5? Gladly, if he's breaking down at age 37, I'll eat the money. But I don't see that even. I don't see that happening. This guy's a durable player. I think at age 37, he'll be slapping the ball around the field.
Yep. No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I think 5 years, $100 million, no brainer. No brainer.
No brainer. All right, we've gone a little bit too long on this segment. We'll get all of our football into one coming up. We'll have the Giants and their pathway against the Seahawks, of which there is none, coming up next. We'll have the Jets and Adam Gase basically saying the quiet part out loud this week. We have plenty more to come. We're with you until 2 o'clock here on One on One.
To support the WFUV Sports Department, visit support.wfuv.org to become a member or make a one-time donation. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
On 1 o'clock, it's one-on-one, New York's longest-running sports call-in show. Emmanuel Barbari with Chris Baccia, our producer Alex Walls, and our headlines man today, Andrew Posadas. It is football Sunday. Got into the Giants a little bit earlier and their pivotal matchup with the Seattle Seahawks. And Chris, when I look at this Giants team, I think there's been so much to like this year. I think there's been so much to be optimistic about. And it seems if you're a Giants fan, you found the head coach. You may have found the quarterback. And even without a Saquon Barkley this year, you found somewhat of an identity as a football team. And moving forward, you're playing with house money. You're in a absolutely brutally, historically brutal division. You are in a situation where you could host a home playoff game this season with a outright losing record, maybe 6-10, maybe 7-9, and 7-9 would probably be generous. So everything else here from this point forward is house money. But I'm starting to hear some comments that are bothersome. They're bothering me. And you have a win over the Bengals in which the Giants, let's put it frankly, they did not play well. You can argue the defense stood tall, but they did not play a good football game. They won by 2 points against a team they never should have been competitive with, especially if this team's going to represent a division in the postseason. You can't be winning a game by 2 points against the Cincinnati Bengals, minus Joe Burrow. It just can't happen. You're playing against a nobody quarterback. I don't care if Daniel Jones gets hurt in the middle of the game. You still had him for half the game. You won by 2 points. So now, because that win propelled them into first place, there's this cockiness that is bothering me. So the Giants, by virtue of the tiebreak with the Washington football team, are 4-7. They're in first place in the NFC East by virtue of a 2-point win over the Cincinnati Bengals. So basically what you're saying is, well, let's make a comparison here, Chris. You're a student in a class. You are a D student, and you say, okay, everyone else in the class stinks. So you know what? I'm going to stand out. I'm going to become a better student. You're a D student. You get a C on the paper. And now you're running around throwing the C in everyone's face because you marginally improved over your already horrific play. So now you're better than the rest of the class, and you're throwing the C in everybody's face, except everyone's really looking at you like, why do you have your chest out in the first place? So that's my issue with the Giants right now. They probably don't deserve to be mentioned in the same breath as the Seattle Seahawks. If everything doesn't go catastrophically wrong this weekend, they'll lose big. So where's this confidence, this aura that this team is better than it is?
Yeah, I mean, I would caution anybody who's on that train to back up a couple steps. I said before they played Cincinnati, they needed to blow them out. It needed to be a statement game. And it was everything but that. I mean, everything but that. I already forgot the name of the Bengals quarterback. So, now here you are, and you got a Seahawks team that should crush them. And the only reason why I'm not convinced they will is because I can never seem to wrap my head around which team that's good is just going to lay an egg. It happens all the time in the National Football League. Maybe the Giants run into one like that. And we've seen the Seahawks show some sign of imperfection this year. So maybe they can play. But this is a Giants team that just isn't very good. And if you'll indulge me to look at the schedule ahead, which I think you've got to do, and you're starting to do the math here, and they have 4 wins. If they win 3, they get to 7. 7 certainly wins them the division. The Browns aren't a true 8-3. I think they're 8-3. I don't think they're a true 8-3. And who knows if the Ravens get their act together by week 16. So I see in the remaining slate of games, they play Cowboys in week 17. They obviously have to beat the Cowboys. If they can't beat the Cowboys, then they don't deserve this division. I see at best this team getting 2 more wins, but I think it's more likely 1. I think it's more likely 1.
So what's sad is the factors are playing in the Giants' favor this weekend. You have a Seattle defense that is the worst passing defense, essentially, in NFL history through the first 13 games of the season, first 13 weeks, rather. Worst passing defense in NFL history. If Daniel Jones is playing, that could be exploited. You do not have the 12th man in Seattle this season, which is a ginormous factor when you're going on the road to play the Seahawks. So without those, you can make an argument with the Giants and the momentum they've had recently to at least make this a competitive game. The other factor that's playing in the Giants' favor this weekend is the division, like you were mentioning. And the division is comical, but look at the matchups this weekend, Chris. The Cowboys have the Ravens, and you can make the argument that the Ravens are depleted, but I still think they're more than good enough to beat the Dallas Cowboys on Sunday night. You have Philadelphia playing the Green Bay Packers, and you have the Washington football team facing off against the undefeated Steelers. The Giants, out of the 4 teams there, have the best chance to win this weekend. And I don't think that's a hot take. I think the Giants have the best chance to win out of anyone I just mentioned in the NFC East. And again, a lot of that would depend on Daniel Jones' health. It's looking like Colt McCoy will play, which basically makes the Giants uncompetitive. But had those factors I initially mentioned been in play, Daniel Jones against a historically bad pass defense, playing on the road in an empty stadium that would normally be bonkers, the 3 other teams in the division playing elite football teams, essentially, the Giants maybe have the easiest matchup. Am I nuts to say that? And even if they lose, they keep first place.
Who do the Cowboys have again?
The Cowboys have
Baltimore. Right? I think I do give Andy Dalton and the Cowboys a better chance to win than the New York Giants this weekend. I'm
not placing any faith in the Cowboys.
Philadelphia, and we'll bring in Andrew here. To talk about his Eagles, because he actually passed a remark before about how he wouldn't want to be a Jet fan. I don't know that I'd want to be an Eagles fan either, Andrew.
Yeah, this is – you're right. And it's crazy because the Philadelphia Eagles, they're the ones left with their starting quarterback, and Carson Wentz has been nothing but straight basura. And for people who don't speak Spanish, that is trash. That's as simple as it gets. And if you're the Giants, E-Man, you mentioned it, the division plays the biggest factor because I think Giants fans coming into the season, when they heard Joe Judge churn out cliche after cliche in his post-introductory press conference, they thought, hey, maybe 6 or 7 wins. You know, that's what we're looking at here optimistically. If Saquon and Daniel Jones stays healthy, you know, to kind of build this team. They didn't know that 6 or 7 wins was going to win them the division. and get a home playoff game. And I know Giants fans are like, well, the Seahawks went 7-9. The Panthers that one year were 7-9, and they won their playoff game. Giants fans, don't get your hopes up, because that could be a matchup against the team out there in the NFC West, where all four teams, if the San Francisco 49ers weren't hurt, all four teams could make the playoffs there in the NFC West. So it seems like an early exit. But E-Man, it just, to me, the Giants really at this point, you got no choice but to go all in and see if you can win this division, because Washington and the Dallas Cowboys aren't going anywhere. And I think as long as Carson Wentz is under center for the Eagles, they're not going anywhere. So it's kind of the Giants' division to win by fall.
It is sad, because you think that the one team with the starting quarterback, like you mentioned, in this decimated division would have the upper hand. If you entered the season saying it'll be week 13, the Giants are 4-7, the football team's 4-7, the Cowboys are 3-8, and the Eagles have Carson Wentz under center, while every other team is decimated. Well, what are we talking about here? This division is ridiculous. And Chris, I really think we're going to wake up on Monday morning. Once we head into week 14, the Giants will be 4-8. They'll lose this weekend to the Seahawks, and they will be in first place.
I'm going to eat my words here, but I think the Washington football team has a chance against the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Oh, stop!
I can't even say it with a straight face.
Yeah, you don't believe yourself.
Yeah, that was probably the test, because I was just going to say it and see. Look, I actually think I like the Alex Smith story. I like the way that they played on Thanksgiving. Look, I think for some reason, I can't figure out who it's going to be, but I'm gonna stand my ground here and tell you that I think it won't be the New York Giants to win this division when it's all said and done. I'll stay there.
I wouldn't go too hard against you there, because I don't like the Giants as a team. I think it's a complete disgrace that this is a distinct possibility. 4-8 at the end of this week, and they have the division by default.
That's a distinct possibility. I agree.
It is, which is very, very strange. And normally that doesn't happen just by virtue of teams playing each other in the division. Like, one team has to be okay,
right? Because
everybody plays each other. Everybody stinks.
It's crazy.
And everybody basically has the same record, which is mind-boggling. I think it defies arithmetic. Let's move on to the Jets. Let's move on to the Jets here, because Adam Gase normally defies arithmetic, and his comments. Is this the first time Adam Gase has made sense, Chris? Well, I think it is, because he's talking about Sam Darnold and how he has failed to develop him. And again, I called it the quiet part out loud before. I called it Adam Gase's admission, maybe. Maybe he doesn't even know what he's talking about. Maybe he's planting the seed because he's trying to get out of town. He knows he's out of town.
Oh, he's gone.
He also mentioned how the Jets' 2016 draft should have been the bedrock of the team right now. And it's not. It didn't turn out that way. So basically, without directly saying it, he's blaming McCagnon and the previous regime for his failures. Maybe he'll bring that into his next job interview. I don't know. But his comments this week are very telling. He's telling the truth, first of all, about roster construction, about his own failures. I don't know what's wrong. I don't know who drugged him. I don't know who gave him the truth serum. But look, I can't dispute anything Adam Gase said, and that's a first.
Look, there's been something wrong from the very beginning. When he was introduced as the new New York Jet football coach. And you talk about his next job interview. I don't really understand. And to this day, cannot wrap my head around how Jets brass walked out of an interview with Adam Gase and said, that's our guy. I can't imagine what he would have said in a job interview, because what I see with my eyes, with my two eyes, I don't need to read the scoop. I just have to watch the guy talk to know how bad he is at his job, how far short he comes of the mark of being a good leader. I mean, it's not even about does he know the X's and O's, because it would be hard for me to evaluate that. Actually, it wouldn't be. He clearly doesn't have a good handle on how to run an offense, because it's the worst offense I've ever seen in my life. And here's the quarterback guru, the quarterback whisperer, I was told. But from a pure leadership perspective, I don't think he could coach up a high school team, Emmanuel. I don't think he could coach up a high school football team.
I don't think he could.
Really. I don't think he could.
Did he control his eyes? Did he control his eyes in the interview? Because if he walked in there with his eyes wandering around the room, how do you make an impression?
It's a red flag. It's a red flag. I mean, it's what they, what do they tell you when you go into an interview? You look nice, get a nice tie, look the part. I mean, he can't even pretend. He can't even pretend. He couldn't even coach up a Madden team on playing. I don't think he could call the right plays on Madden.
I do wonder, and Christopher Johnson, these are recent quotes. Look, this happened this year where he called him a good leader. So you basically said how he misses the mark for some reason, and I don't think anyone's asked him this. I may be wrong, but we have such a lack of curiosity, I think, in society right now, where why is no one asking what qualities of a good leader does he have? Christopher Johnson, where does that go? Can you be specific? Can we follow up on that? Because he called him a good leader about 5 weeks ago, and I want to go back to that 2016 draft comment, and we'll bring in Andrew here as well. He's saying 2016 should have been the bedrock, basically as a jab at McCagnon. At least that's the way I took it. The first round pick was Darren Lee. The second round pick, Chris, take a guess who the second round pick was in 2016.
In 16, was it Hackenberg?
It was Christian Hackenberg.
Yeah. Terrible.
What are we talking about? First of all, the fact that Hackenberg was a second round pick is a abject disgrace. And second of all,
what'd they say about him? He couldn't hit water from the beach. Or from a boat.
Yeah, he
how
couldn't
is
hit water
that
if he fell out of a boat.
That was supposed to culminate in the Jets' core of play. Darren Lee, Christian Hackenberg, Jordan Jenkins.
And I want to pose this question to you both. Have we ever seen any other head coach or a coaching candidate get a job based on a letter of recommendation from a former player, Hall of Famer and Peyton Manning? But again, have we ever seen anybody coast this far into a coaching career based off a letter of recommendation? I can't think of any in any of the North American sports.
It's not what you know, it's who you know.
Yep.
And I think that is exactly what we've learned. Chris, you're mentioning the job interview. Look, I'm not going to take away from the fact that you need to make first impressions on people. But if you walk in there with a recommendation from Peyton Manning, hey, you got the job.
I mentioned the first time that Peyton Manning shagged the Jets, and it was when he stayed in school for another year. And then the second time was he handed the New York Jets the worst head football coach that I could have invented in my mind. I couldn't have drawn it up better. So Peyton Manning now has a couple strikes against the Jets record. Thankfully, we beat him in the playoffs, so gives me a little bit of a solace there. I'll just leave it here on Adam Gase, because you can only say so much, is that when he talks, when he speaks, I have a personal disdain for him that, he is a really, he is a tough guy. I mean, it's not like Bowles was a bad coach. He was a bad coach, and he was.
I didn't hate him as a guy, though.
But he was a fine guy. He was a nice guy. Nice guy.
When Gase walks up there, I cringe. I think, what is this guy doing?
No,
here?
I can't watch it. Emmanuel, to be honest with you, I don't watch it anymore. I don't watch it anymore.
I don't think I could envision a worse representative of a National Football League team. And I just watch him walk up to that podium and I say, this guy doesn't belong. What are you doing in this room? Leave.
Well,
don't speak. Leave.
I can't understand why he's there. I don't know if there's a hostage situation that that I don't know why he is in the job.
You're onto something. You're onto something, because if Christopher Johnson is calling him a good leader, that's my only explanation.
Yeah.
Adam Gase has something on Christopher Johnson.
Can I tell you though, there is an answer to it. There actually is, and the answer to it is that the Jets want to lose games, and there's nobody better at losing games than Adam Gase. If his task is to lose every football game of the 2020 football season, there's nobody more fit for that job than Adam Gase. As backwards as it is, that is the only explanation for it. It is the only logic in the whole situation. Why is he there? After every single game this year would have given you a good reason to say, time to give him the axe. Every single game you could have said on Monday, yep, we're firing him. Nobody would have dissented from that. But the reason that he is there is because he gives the Jets the best chance every Sunday to lose. And that's why he's there.
Still doesn't forgive the initial hire. I'll never forgive it. They weren't trying to lose football games 3 years ago or 2 years ago. Another short stint. I have nothing left to say, Chris.
No.
Like we can't waste more airtime on this. We only have so much time left tonight. We do have to get a station ID in here. We have Andrew. He's going to stick with us. He'll bring some more headlines. You're going to want to stick with us. A lot more to get to. Mike Walshewski coming up in this hour, the Knicks PA announcer. I'm not even going to talk about the content and tease it in that interview. You'll just want to hear his voice. And the concept of the voice of God, I guess. You'll just want to hear him. So stay tuned for that. We'll be back with headlines right after this. Subscribe to WFUV Sports to catch our simulcast Saturday nights and get notifications so you never miss another show. Miss the show? You can find on-demand segments, interviews, and highlights every week. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics. It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener-supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org. This is One on One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org.
I am Andrew Posadas with some more headlines alongside Emmanuel Berbari and Chris Baccia. Fellas, I want to start off with the NHL. Obviously, we've seen what the NFL and the NBA is doing to navigate the coronavirus pandemic in their respective seasons. Now for the NHL, they have a target date. They're aiming for a mid-January start with a 52 or 56 game schedule, The initial target date of January 1st became unfeasible because of the time needed for training camps, plus extra time that was promised to the 7 teams that did not make this past summer's playoff field. TSN first reported on this mid-January start, and many players are still scattered at their offseason homes, many still in Europe, of course. And according to Commissioner Gary Bettman, they're not expected to have a bubble environment for the 2020-21 season, but he did say that the season also remains a fluid situation in terms of planning ahead. So, E-Man, I'll start with you. What do you think about the NHL's proposal to have a mid-January start with a shortened season and no bubble environment for this upcoming season?
E-Man's you.
To take myself off mute, the perks of Zoom. Thank you, Chris. I will say this, and I know we had some debate before about the NBA schedule format. I do like that if you have a 52 or 56 game season, these leagues can eventually hit the reset button, and we can eventually get back to a point where basketball, hockey, starting around October, you're in a normal sports calendar, and these leagues can get back to some semblance of quote unquote normal. Now, I'm not for these leagues losing revenue, and if they need to play more games and eventually get back in the business of getting fans in the stands, I get that. But my initial reaction, aside from all the negotiations that have to take place, first of all, 52 or 56, no one's going to dispute the validity of that season. That's long enough. We've had lockouts before. I would be A-okay with 52 to 56, and it would be a nice rapid season. We just had a baseball season of that nature. And I also like the fact that next October you can hit the reset button and say, let's get back to 81, 82 games and go from there. So hockey is a little tougher in the sense that you have more Canadian franchises. You have more players coming from overseas and areas where, to put it frank, you're going to have to vet, and you're going to have to provide yourself enough leeway time to get these players up and ready to go. So I'm not sure exactly the specifics of how they're going to do that, but 52 to 56, I'm here for it, Chris. You're mentioning before, 81, 82 can get a little long.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. You seem to have changed your tone here. Maybe we convinced you in the last segment, because
how did I change my tone though?
Well, you weren't on this wavelength with basketball.
But basketball is doing a 72 game season. They're hoping to do a full season, but they won't give me the schedule. So I fully expect that when hockey comes to terms on this 52 game season, or 56, whatever they come to, they'll give us a schedule and they'll make it work.
Okay, I understand the distinction.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, I think again, the shortened season, I've got no problem with it. I unfortunately think that the situation is going to grow more and more precarious as the days go along, and it can throw things up in the air again. I'm afraid that we're going to have to see that again. I hope that these leagues are ready for that, whereas it was impossible to be ready for it the first time. I hope they're ready for what we may be in for, unfortunately, and they can adjust on the fly. And I think that's the concept behind some of the flexibility afforded by a shortened season. So I'm all for this. I know the NHL, Andrew, had some problems even getting together on a deal. So it's good to see that they've shown some progress here.
Yeah, still they're looking to go over a financial stalemate that they have since they've signed their new CBA this past July. And they've also kicked around having more outdoor games. Obviously, being in indoor arenas, there's so much there with protocols and vents and making sure, there aren't any outbreaks. So perhaps more outdoor games could help facilitate that schedule, especially a shortened season. So we'll see what the National Hockey League does with that. Again, they won't start until mid-January, the earliest. Guys, I want to transition over to the collegiate side of sports and to a program near and dear to our hearts, a program that we all covered at FUV, the Florida men's basketball team. They paused all team activities to begin the month of December, and the pause forces the Rams to cancel their much anticipated road game against St. John's University on December 8th. So as of right now, the Rams' first 4 non-conference games are canceled. The pause ends on December 12th. And as of right now, that game, December 13th against the University of Maine, is said to be canceled, although there are talks that they may reschedule it. So as of right now, the first game of the season for head coach Jeff Neubauer and his squad will be on December 19th at home against Central Connecticut State. Chris, we mentioned how much of an impact COVID is going to have, whether it be professional or on the collegiate level. But for Fordham, this is a very, very difficult disadvantage that they're going to start with just 2 non-conference games before they begin A-10 conference play on December 30th against GW.
Yeah, and a bit of an uphill battle for the program as it was coming into the year. So it's really unfortunate to see. I think you could certainly ask the question about, well, let me ask you guys this question because I actually don't know the answer. And I don't know if any of us do, but a positive case, does that automatically trigger a program-wide shutdown? I mean, apparently it does, but is that something that we knew? Okay,
it depends on the program, because you'll see some teams now and they'll have a positive test, and it will depend, okay, are they with the team? What's the contact tracing like? Can we play the game? Can we not play the game? I haven't seen some other teams that have had positive tests go into this quote unquote mandatory 14-day shutdown. Andrew, this seems like a Fordham specific thing. Now other programs are doing it. So I'm not saying Fordham's the only program in the nation that's shutting down for every positive test, but this is a Fordham thing where it's part of their protocols, and it's going to make the season very difficult, because one positive test, instead of isolating that player and figuring out what's going on, a 14-day shutdown for the entire team. And not only for the entire team, they can't do anything. They're all quarantining right now. I saw Josh Navarro on Twitter the other day saying, I just want a ball.
Yep.
We're getting these cryptic tweets now. So it's a difficult situation, like Chris said. And you're going to get back on, what is it, December 13th, and start working out and playing again. You're playing 5 days later. That's not an easy situation to be in. And that's part of the reason they had to cancel Maine.
And Eman, I would say this. They started off the month of December just like they started off the month of November. They had a positive case then and had to go 14 days on a pause. And talking with Coach Neubauer for my preview article for the Fordham Ram newspaper, he emphasized that avoiding another 14-day quarantine was essential for this team going into the season. Another positive confirmed test. And the crazy part is, guys, we have other teams on campus, women's basketball, the softball teams out there, the soccer teams are practicing in anticipation for their spring season. The only 2 positive confirmed cases within Fordham athletics, within the Fordham men's basketball program, Chris. So I think that has to speak to how the program is operating in terms of safety protocols, because we've gotten no other confirmed positive cases outside of the men's basketball team.
Yeah, no, I hear that. I do think it's tough though to blame. I don't know. I mean, I hear you where there's 2 cases and they both have derived from the same place. But unfortunately, this virus in a lot of ways can be, yes, it can be prevented. There are many measures you can take, but assuming that Fordham men's basketball is doing that, you can also just get really unlucky.
It's random.
And it's random selection like that. So I have to imagine that they've run into bad luck. Now, there's been 2. A third is sort of unthinkable for how do you even put together a real season? How does this even count as a real season? And I think that's a question that is really happening nationwide, especially as the virus ratchets up and restrictions ratchet up. Are we going to get a genuine college basketball season? That is absolutely still, the jury is still out on that. Absolutely.
It is out. And like Andrew mentioned, that's 2 14-day shutdowns for the team where they're not doing anything. They're not lifting a finger over those 14 days. And that's everyone. Not only a couple players, everyone. 28 total days. Over what? The last month and a half? Not even.
Right.
So they've had more days sitting around in the past month and a half than they've had playing basketball. It's tough to do a season that way. And if they have one more shutdown, I'm not sure how like we said so much throughout the show, the integrity of the season is going to be maintained. The conference play is right around the corner. Feels like basketball hasn't even started yet. We're less than a month away from A-10 basketball, and they have to get that season in because they've made it known in certain terms, all these conferences, there is going to be March Madness in 2021. So you need conference champions. You need basketball. I think it's just going to be a scenario now where Fordham's just not prepared for the conference season, regardless of COVID.
Yeah, the prospect of having to enter A10 play with only 2 non-conference games under your belt, that does not bode well whatsoever for Coach Neubauer and that team. And again, we're seeing teams have to navigate, today's much anticipated matchup between number 1 Gonzaga and number 2 Baylor. That was canceled subsequently. And even crazier, because just a week ago, Gonzaga had a positive case of somebody who was traveling with them, and they still played down there in Florida against Kentucky. And again, it's a very fluid situation, and it seems to be at every program's discretion. So for Fordham, as far as we're concerned, they won't be back until the 12th, and they'll have exactly 1 week to get ready for Central Connecticut State. But fellas, I want to talk more about COVID and how it's impacting college athletics. Let's move over to college football. Ohio State today against Michigan State, they're down 23 players listed as out. And this is interesting because they only have 2 games left, including this one. And the Big Ten Conference has stated you need at least 6 games to qualify for the championship and subsequently get yourself into the college football playoff. So Ohio State cannot afford to lose any more games. But again, this poses the question, E-Man, if Ohio State is to lose a game in the next couple of weeks and end up 5-0, what do you think the Big Ten and the NCAA do to get a team like Ohio State, who absolutely deserves to be in the college football playoff? We're not arguing. They're one of the best teams in the country. How do you think they should go about that situation if Ohio State doesn't end up getting to the finish line and getting 6 games under their belt?
I think that's kind of a dumb rule to begin with, right? The fact that you need this game quota, and especially in this crazy year where you have several college football programs not even playing that opted out of the season to begin with. It's been such a wild ride here in college football that why are we even going with 6 games to begin with? Well, why do you need every game to get in? And did you see there was some, not sure if it was a university president or an athletic director, there was some crazy conspiracy out there that they were intentionally canceling the game and using COVID as a mask to prevent Ohio State from getting into the playoff or something like that. And that was floating around there. And of course, like everything this year, it became this big political argument. But I think I'm not sure what they do to waive that and get them in. I'm sure it would be a subject of big controversy. I just think the rule is terrible to begin with, especially when you have a season that may not have gone off to begin with.
Yeah, well, if they have to pull a waiver, I don't know. I don't know how that would. I don't know how people would respond to that.
Talk about favoritism.
Yeah, I mean, you can't necessarily do that. If you set a rule, you set a rule. So I think it's a hypothetical that Buckeye fans don't really want to think about, because if they don't hit the 6, I don't see a way where they can be in the college football playoff. I don't know what you could pull. It would be as clear as day what was happening, what the NCAA was doing if they granted some sort of waiver.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody's going to feel sorry for Ohio State. When this was at its worst earlier in the summer, and we were talking about is there going to be a fall football season, Ohio State was the first program out there saying, hey, we want to play. And they got a lot of pushback and negative feedback from everyone else around the country, saying that they were a bit naive and just oblivious to the situation, to the pandemic. So I don't think anybody's going to feel bad for them, but Ohio State has proven they're one of the 4 best teams in the country when healthy. So if I had to think about it, with their fan base and the amount of money that they generate being in the college football playoff, I can only imagine that the Big Ten Conference and the NCAA, they're going to work on something. If they can't hit 6 games, they're going to work on something to get Ohio State qualified for the Big Ten championship. And if they win that, get them into the CFB. But again, this is what we all saw, and that's why the Pac-12 started their schedule a bit later on. And there was no avoiding it, but E-Man, for Ohio State, this is what you signed up for. You wanted to play a season. This is what happens. And if they don't qualify ultimately with 6 games, they can be mad all they want, but this is what they signed up for when they were talking all that stuff this past summer about wanting to go out there and play.
Difficult situation indeed. I don't think anyone's going to have any sympathy. We want to see the best teams in the college football playoff. I'm not sure if it's going to be feasible this year if they don't get to that threshold. Plenty more to come. Good stuff, Andrew. Good stuff, guys. We have Mike Walshewski coming on the show. He's going to join us coming up next. He's the PA voice of the Knicks. Get to hear those golden pipes. Get to hear about his journey into his profession. He's really the best at what he does. Those legendary sounds and tones at Madison Square Garden. And we'll talk a little bit about what's in store for an NBA season from a PA announcer's perspective with no fans to rile up, essentially. So that's all coming up next. We'll wrap the show after that. It's one-on-one. We're with you until 2.
Be sure to follow WFUV Sports on all of our social media platforms. At WFUV Sports on Twitter, at WFUV_sports on Instagram, and WFUV Sports on Facebook and YouTube. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Joining us on this edition of the Off the Air podcast is the public address announcer for the New York Knicks, Mike Walshewski, a Fordham alum, class of 1979. Mike, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
So let's flash back to your time at Fordham, and even before that, what or who inspired you to pursue this, to be an arena announcer?
Well, when I was a young kid, back before Fordham was established, I developed a love for sports. I had older cousins who were sports fans, and I love to participate in sports and that kind of thing. So I just caught the sports bug at an early age. I actually had two cousins who were Baltimore Oriole fans, believe it or not. And they took me to my first Oriole Yankee game at Yankee Stadium when I was young. And my father, who passed away shortly after that, was a Brooklyn Dodger fan. So he took me to Met games. So I had to decide on allegiance, and I finally decided to become a Met fan. So in those days, the traditional radio path was to go out of town to a small radio station, TV station, work your way back to New York. I was about to make the decision to do that in my junior year, trying to make plans. And then what happened was one day I was walking in the hallways of FUV, and there was a little 3x5 index card typewritten on the bulletin board saying, there's a new outfit called Sports Phone. Sports Phone is looking for announcers and producers. It's a new technology. Well, what that was, and I don't know how much you guys have may or may not have heard of Sports Phone, but basically what you did was dial a phone number. In this case, it was 976-1313. And you would get 60 seconds of the latest sports news and scores. I had a good spot there. But what happened was in the late 80s, we had a situation where ESPN started. People had what were called then beepers, where you could get readouts of scores on your own personal device. So everybody was chipping away at us. And finally, Sports Phone was no longer had near the impact that it had. So that was done. So then I had a career choice at that point and say what to do. And what ended up happening was I got a call about, well, actually first I wrote a book on sports trivia as an outgrowth of what I used to do for Sports Phone. And then shortly after that, I got a call from John Cirillo, who Fordham grad, obviously, and adjunct professor at Fordham for a long time, who was VP of PR for the Knicks at that point. And they said, John Condon is ill. He had been the original Knicks PA announcer from the mid-1940s, okay? He's ill. He needs a backup. Would you like to audition to be his backup? And I said, sure. Because at that time, you know, it was sometime after I graduated from Fordham. I had been doing PA here and there for Fordham, for Seton Hall. There was a USBL, the United States Basketball League, kind of a precursor to the G League. And they had a team in New York that played at the Westchester County Center. I did PA for them. So I was beginning to be known as a PA guy. So I was one of 8 guys who auditioned at the Garden doing a high school prelim game for the job. And at the end, I got the job. I didn't think I was going to get the job because my audition turned out to be the Hebrew League championship game. And not being Jewish and not being familiar with Hebrew and not wanting to mispronounce names to, you know, make myself look bad, I went and got all the names and luckily pulled it off. But yeah, so that's what happened. And that was in 1989, the spring of 89. And I did my first Knick game in the spring of 89, Knicks Celtics. Rick Pitino was actually a Knick coach then. And been doing it ever since. So that's how I got to do that.
Thanks for sharing that. One of the things you mentioned early, Mike, was during your time at FUV, you graduated 1977 from Fordham, that you guys were playing in big stadiums, national games. And right. That's something that we actually, we haven't necessarily had the chance to do during our time at FUV. What was it like getting the chance to do big game basketball or football or whatever it was? Now you're in the world's most famous arena. How did that prepare you?
It was that's a good question. And actually, Chris, we had some memorable moments on the road at big arenas. Between the Fordham experience there and the Garden experience, really when I started, you know, it's funny, when I started doing PA at the Garden, I was so used to doing PA, I wasn't nervous. You know, I was nervous the first game I ever did, but I quickly got over it. And there have only been a handful of times where I felt a little bit tense. One of those was the first one. You have to understand, John Condon was a legend. All right, he did the job for 33 years. He worked full time for the Garden. He worked in the boxing department a lot toward the latter part of his tenure there. And I used to imitate him in the shower. I mean, you know, I because the acoustics in my bathroom when I was growing up were good. And I really did. And then, so now here's what happens. And I wish we had a video of the opening, my first game, which was actually my first official game, was the beginning of 89-90 season, even though I had done one game the prior spring, but over the summer he passed. So that's why they had this mega tribute to him on the scoreboard, deservedly so. His wife was sitting directly across from me in the first 2 celebrity seats at the Garden, near midcourt, directly opposite me. And they had this tribute. And then he used to say at the end of a game, drive home safely, good night. Okay. So the guy who narrated the piece on Condon finished it by saying, and John, drive home safely, good night. And the lights went dark. It was dramatic. I was emotional. And then the plan was, the way we had rehearsed it was, he was going to get up from his seat, the guy who did the voiceover for the tribute, and then I was going to take the seat, lights would come back up, and I would say, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Madison Square Garden. It was a little nerve-wracking, but that worked out fine. But the only other times I may have been a little tense was when we had the first All-Star game at the Garden, and that was in '94, I think, if I remember correctly. And then the first game after 9/11, which was very emotional, and and frankly, there was still a chill in the air, especially in New York City. There were rumors of, well, they're going to bomb the Garden, and that kind of thing. And so, yeah, but outside of that, it's just been fun. Just been fun.
You talked about that excitement and that energy. You've had several notable calls, all the way from Patrick Ewing to more recently Carmelo Anthony. And I was reading a piece in the Times about various PA announcers, and you were talking specifically about making sure that you excite the fans without inserting yourself. How do you strike that balance throughout your career of making sure that you're accurately representing the game and pumping up the fans without inserting yourself?
Yeah, it's a good question, Emmanuel. It's a situation where when I started, I tried to be John Condon Jr. He was emotive, but not real upbeat. But he was a classic. People loved it. Anyway, after about 2 years, new ownership came over. Dave Checketts became the new president of the Garden. And he was somebody who said, let's pick it up a little bit. And at that time, NBA announcers had already started picking it up a little bit. So I picked it up a little bit. But there's always been the sense at the Garden, starting from the top, that we're a classy professional place to watch a basketball game, iconic mecca of basketball. So I strike the balance by being very upbeat, but also continuing to be informative. I have to say, they give me pretty much total leeway. They just let me go. And I just feel that I strike the balance of being upbeat, but yet being professional. There are other PA announcers in other markets, who maybe just announce a nickname when a guy gets a basket, and or there's a sound effect after the basket. They yell and scream in a few arenas, and that's all cool. I mean, it's different things for different markets. The Garden market is the way it is, and trust me, if they ever told me, we'd like you to take it up a notch or two and be crazy, I could do that. But no, there's no pressure to do that. And I feel very comfortable where I'm at with it. And, I think people get a good experience, and the response has been very positive over the years.
Mike, you talk about some of those moments that maybe made you a little nervous, brought chills, whether that was your first game, the first game after 9/11. I think about a PA announcer as being the person who feeds off the energy of the building more than anyone. And of course, we have empty arenas right now where we're not filling stadiums with fans due to the pandemic. I wonder if the first day that we have a full Madison Square Garden crowd and you're there as the PA announcer, if that will be another add to the list of times where there were chills running up your spine as the PA announcer.
Believe it or not, Chris, I've already thought of that, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I thought of it in the context of what's going to be like for the first game without fans, because they will be using PA announcers, and I plan on doing some games for sure, and it could go on all season. That's going to be a little different too, and I know that I'm not going to change my style or anything of that nature. I will be me. But you're right. Let's even think that we might not have, I don't know, who knows? We might not have any fans for any games through the end of the season this year. I mean, that's a definite possibility. We would hope to have fans back when the following season starts, which would be, next fall. It's going to be a big adrenaline rush, and the crowd is going to be nuts. They're going to be more nuts than I am. I mean, and it's just going to be like a year plus of pent up energy. Also in anticipation of the team, being better at that point. We would all hope it is. And so, with new players who nobody has ever seen in person, I mean, unless they travel to a city that's allowing fans, it's going to be awesome. It's going to be awesome. And I look forward to something like that. And yeah, I think that could be the next real emotional moment for me.
Mike mentioned your career and some of the notable moments. Want to leave you with this. Do you have a favorite name you've gotten to call throughout your career and introduce?
Oh, there's no doubt it's Patrick Ewing. There's no doubt. I mean, he, that's the one that I've kind of been most synonymous with. And I'm glad it's him because he happens to be a great guy. I'll leave you with this. It's really funny. When my daughter graduated from Fordham, what is now 8 years ago, we were at a graduation, and it's on the the main ceremony is held on Edwards, okay, and if you were a parent of a student, and you as a parent you went to Fordham, which I and my wife did, you get to sit up on the stairs on a kind of a reviewing stand on Edwards, or also if you're a celebrity. So anyway, we qualified as parents, obviously, and we walked up the stairs, and I turn around to my wife. I said, "There's Pat," and she goes, "Who's Pat?" I said, Patrick Ewing. He was about 4 rows down. His daughter, Randy, was in my daughter's graduating class. And so I went back and said hello. He had just had another child in a stroller, so he was kind of lying low. But I want people to know he is a great guy. I mean, he is a classy stand-up. I just wish they could have gotten over the hump for a championship. I'll always blame Sam Cassell, Game 3. Making the big shot at the end for the Rockets, which cost us that after we were even 1-1 with them. But anyway, he is a great guy. He was in the back. But who am I sitting next to up in the front? And this is especially a little poignant at this time, is Alex Trebek. Because Alex Trebek's son, Matt, was also in the class. So what happens is, most of the time we couldn't talk because the ceremony was beginning. He was sitting like 1 row behind and 1 seat over. And then there was a break after they have the main ceremony where all the different Fordham schools kind of leave into their own, for their own gathering and issuing of diplomas. But, the main Fordham College stays on Edwards. But there's like a 20-minute spot there where they're reconfiguring everything, getting the diplomas ready, changing people. And we were standing at the top step of Edwards, and I started talking to him. I struck up a conversation, told him who I was, very receptive. You want to talk about another guy who was a hell of a guy. In that 20, 25 minutes that I spoke to him that day, it was him. Very, very knowledgeable in sports and knew what I did, because a lot of celebrity wouldn't know, necessarily wouldn't grasp exactly what I do, or what my job entails, I should say. And he did, knew his hockey so well. Like he would be your hockey nerd if he wasn't Alex Trebek, your buddy who's a hockey nerd, and also knew basketball. And it was, and I'll never forget that. And we were standing on top of all the people down there, and like people I knew, I come down there. Why were you talking to Alex Trebek? You talked to Alex Trebek. I said, yeah, and he's a wonderful man, and I was so sad when he passed. The funny thing, he goes, one funny thing anecdotally, I said, hey, how did your son end up at Fordham? And he goes, I don't know. He just ended up here. He was talking to my wife, had a couple of places, wanted to go to place X, and now he's here. And I believe Alex flew in himself for that ceremony. His wife was otherwise busy or whatever. Or maybe she was there and I just didn't notice. But, he flew cross country, and then I guess went back pretty much right away. But he was just a great guy. He really was.
That's Mike Walszewski. Appreciate the reflections. Thanks for joining us, and enjoy the return of basketball to the Garden.
I'm looking forward to it. Thanks for having me, guys. Best of luck to you.
To support the WFUV Sports Department, visit support.wfuv.org to become a member or make a one-time donation. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Final 10 minutes on one-on-one. Thanks for sticking with us here on this now Sunday morning on FUV, streaming on YouTube and Facebook Live. Emmanuel Barbari, rejoined by Chris Baccia and Andrew Posadas. We're going to toy around with a little bit of a new segment here. We're going to call it News and Notes. Just going to have some general observations from the week that was. We all take in a lot of headlines every week in this information-heavy society. So we sort them out, and then we're going to each offer our own, and we'll discuss it a little bit. So final 10 minutes. My observation is from the fight, the exhibition last Saturday, which actually came off as a wild success. You had Mike Tyson and Roy Jones Jr. going at it. They exceeded 1 million pay-per-view buys. So it far exceeded expectations. And really what was an outrageous decision to call it a draw. I really think it was predetermined. It was the fix was probably in, because anyone with eyes and a brain saw that Tyson won the fight. So that was observation number one there. Number two, did you guys see after the fight, apparently there was a fan that attacked Mike Tyson. I've heard this is a normal occurrence. This guy has has been shouting at Tyson after many fights, but apparently he went up to him and said, I'll take you out back, let's fight. And when Tyson said it's not going to end well for you, he took a swing at him. So I'm not sure how gone you have to be, how outside the realm of reality you have to be to think that that's a good idea, to think that that will end well for you. But very fascinating, to say the least, that a fan is taking a swing at Mike Tyson.
Yeah, guy with a death wish, evidently, Andrew. I mean, I don't know what would drive you to do this. Yeah, I got nothing else to add.
Yeah, I mean, Eban, you mentioned it. It was a draw, and I think people on Twitter were saying, "Oh, they're going to have a rematch." But Roy Jones Jr. looked like he wanted no more parts, no more smoke with Mike Tyson. I think they had an agreement before that Mike wouldn't give him any haymakers that might knock his block off. But that fan saw Mike Tyson really have mercy on Roy Jones Jr., but I'm sure that Mike would not have mercy on this person. And again, death wish, nothing to lose. I don't know what's going on in this person's life, but if you're going up to Mike Tyson, I don't care if he's damn near 60, man. That is one man that you do not want to pick a fight.
I think you're already dead if you're making that decision. Maybe not physically dead, but you're mentally dead, and you don't feel alive if you're making that decision to take a swing at Mike Tyson. By the way, Andrew, you're completely correct. Tyson had way more in the tank, at least I think, and he brought his A game. I don't think Roy Jones Jr. wants anything to do with him moving forward. Also, you had the Jake Paul, Nate Robinson fight as the undercard, and Paul, the YouTuber who's fought before, Robinson, who's the former NBA player. Of course, people in this town know him as the former Knick and the slam dunk champion, who really has never fought before and really stepped outside his bounds. Looked like he was getting in this like cage match where he wanted to attack Jake Paul, and he kept going at him, and that's not how you box. And he ultimately got obliterated, is what happened. But now Jake Paul, after just that embarrassing performance by Nate Robinson, seems to think that he's this amazing fighter. And I'll give it to him. It was impressive on his part to hit around Nate Robinson the way he did. But now Jake Paul thinks that he can fight Conor McGregor, which is, I mean, talk about being gone from reality. We now have someone, I want to get the exact quote here.
Someone else with a death wish.
Someone else with a death. Yes. Hold on. I'm going to find this quote.
And can I just give 3 observations real quick, guys, on this? Number one, Nate Robinson did a disservice to Knicks fans wearing orange and blue and then subsequently getting knocked out. I think for Knicks fans, they've seen that for the last 20 years, just knockout after knockout in terms of decision making and seasons. 2, the way Nate Robinson fought, if you go outside of campus in Fordham and just walk up and down Fordham Road, I promise you will find 5 guys who will fight better than Nate Robinson did in the ring. And as you mentioned, my 3rd observation, now Jake Paul gets to walk around strutting his stuff, E-Man, and saying that he can take down somebody like Conor McGregor or Floyd Mayweather Jr. It's absolutely ridiculous.
The quote is, I am dedicating my life to beating Conor McGregor. Financially, it already makes sense. Financially, I'm already one of the biggest prize fighters, and there's only a couple more bosses to check off. I think that's boxes. He said bosses. And to beat and to conquer. So he's treating Conor McGregor like it's a checkbox. And he's also saying he's dedicating his life to beating him. I hope he doesn't, because that life's not going to end well. And I don't know what to tell these people. It may be a good money-making tactic, but you are just out of your depth. You've completely left the universe with these comments. completely departed from planet Earth.
Look, the guy's a jerk. We've known that. I think I did a quick Google on him, and I'll be honest, full disclosure, I don't follow this much. Andrew gave me a little bit of a rundown beforehand. It's a bit of a circus. I already follow the New York Jets, but I saw that he took PPP money from the federal government this summer, and then threw massive parties in his mansion. So, not a cool guy. Speaking of death wishes, if I could turn it over, I don't know if you guys caught this Texas football player earlier this week.
I did.
Who was upset with the call of the referee and did something that I have never seen in my years. His response to this call was to lay out the official. I mean, blindside him. Absolutely brought the house to this guy, sacked him, sacked the referee without him looking. And he got some shot in. I would say we could play it for you, but I actually think we'd have to. I don't even think we can. It's that bad. So no update on the referee's health status, but apparently he got up on his own power, which is the important part here. But the Texas football player, but the high school kid is a high school kid. If I didn't mention, he's done. He actually has charges of assault, and rightfully so. And his team can't play in the playoffs, and rightfully so. This was one of the more egregious breaches of the rules. I mean, this really was assault. This left the plane of football and became an act of violence that we all caught on camera. And yes, it's natural to laugh a little bit because it is something else. I mean, it's an old man that he hit.
Well, yeah, we're laughing not because, of course, we're concerned that the old man is okay, that being the referee. But I remember watching the video, and the ref makes the call, and he calls it on number 88. And then I see a football player in pads come out of nowhere as the referee turns around and absolutely, like, this isn't even a sack. This is a destruction. And I looked to pinpoint the number. Is that number 88? Because he just called the penalty on him. And lo and behold, it was the same guy who had just been tossed from the game, actually, in that call. He said number 88's been ejected. He basically re-ejected himself by doing the biggest breach on the rules you could ever see, the most egregious conduct on a football field. And take away this guy's future and his teammates' future that he's jeopardizing by doing this. Texas high school football is a big deal. Yeah, that's like college football around here, even bigger than that in many circles. It's a huge deal to be disqualified from the playoffs moving forward and disqualified from future competition. What a terrible selfish act, which you can only chuckle about in the beginning.
E-Man, this man, the old man in question, the ref has a name, Fred Gracia. And Emmanuel Duran, who did this, he got the roughing the passer penalty. Then he argued, had some exchange of words, got a second a second penalty, which led to the ejection, and then just comes out and straight trucks this man. And again, you mentioned it. I have family in Texas. They take high school football very, very seriously, especially in the smaller towns. He's the reigning defensive player of the year in high school football. This kid should be, I mean, he's a senior anyway, but he should be done. He should be done with football in Texas. And he's also a wrestler too, one of the best in the state. I know it's not the same sport, but there should be something, a suspension or something that the wrestling team does to kind of at least show him that this can't be tolerated on any platform, on any level of high school athletics, E-Man. But again, and this isn't even the first time. I read that in 2015, they had a few players who had attacked the ref in Texas football. So the crazy part is this has happened before, and the fans there, they cheered after he was ejected and hit the ref. So for some of the fans there, come on now. Like, I know you're upset with some of these calls, and these are big games, but you cannot applaud a young man doing that to an official. It just can't happen.
It was a criminal act. It was a criminal act.
It's not tolerated in football. It's not tolerated in life. He should probably be detained, actually, for a little while so he can get his life back together, because that's not acceptable actions on the street, which is why, well, you're also appalled when you watch the video. Well, we got to wrap. That's our news and notes segment. We hope you enjoyed it. We hope to keep this going in the weeks to come. But thanks for tuning in. It was a great show, guys. Big thanks to our guest today, Fordham women's basketball head coach Stephanie Gately, along with Knicks PA announcer Mike Walshewski, the sports director of WFUV, Bobby Chaffardini. Our great producer today was Alex Walls. And for our headlines man, Andrew Posadas and Chris Baccia, I'm Emmanuel Barbari. It's 2 a.m. This has been One on One.